was the next most?
After last year, it's easier to cancel than it is to try to
20
get
to
in.
30
So
Wow.
you are
in one day.
That's
So
awesome.
you put silver in there.
But yeah, it's literally 40 to 50% of our year-long budget comes in one day.
That's
And then you're
amazing.
not spending a dime of that money until May 6th or 7th, whatever the first term is. But yeah, the start was almost worthy of the heart attack.
I think we're live.
But I mean, the University Ridge is probably within 5 minutes of my house.
Okay, John.
I can't even get into the damn thing, and I got guys driving from Kenosha and Stevens Point and Eau Claire.
Around here, Dan?
I got there. I got it.
You don't have
That's,
to. You don't have to.
that's one of the bad things about the first come, first serve. Is that
Well, but it's not like I wasn't ready. I clicked in at 8 o'clock and it buffered for 45 minutes. I got in.
oh, I
It
bet
was
it
full.
buffered longer than that because
Well,
it was
full.
no earlier than 9:30. We were literally. I said to Rob, if we called Blue Golf to see if we could just absolutely stop everything, and then we were gonna see if we could start the entry process Thursday.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next session of the WSGA Rules Review. Sorry for the last-minute changes last week, but a big thank you to Dan for walking you all through rules 14, 15, 16. I promise this just was not a lame attempt by me to get out of having to teach rule 14. But
Dan was good. You're on notice right.
I'm sure Dan was not only good, he was probably better. So thanks to Dan. So now that Dan has done the hard part with rule 14, we're going to look today, start with rules 17, and then we're really going to try to get through, or one way or another, we will get through everything today, just figuring there's not much point in having a separate session just to cover, rules 22, 23, and 24 or something like that. Those ought to be fairly straightforward. And I think that actually 17 through 20 will be fairly quick. As Dan pointed out, when you look at the rules book, there are a fair number of diagrams in there. So, pictures always help us. So with that, we'll pick up with rule 17. And we'll look at one definition with that, and it's a new term for this year of penalty area on page 214. And this is something that previously, when we talked about water hazards, included this, but it's been renamed and it's been broadened that by having a more generic title that allows, the rules also allow committee more authority and more discretion in terms of what a committee actually defines as a penalty area. So we see a penalty area is simply an area from which relief with a one-stroke penalty is allowed. So it could be a body of water, and the definition clarifies that a body of water, even if not marked by the committee, is still a penalty area. And this is an addition for this year, any other part of the course the committee defines as a penalty area. So this really now authorizes committees to do what many committees have been doing for years, in terms of marking areas of rough or simply the trees or jungle or something like that as penalty areas to provide a player a relief option other than simply stroke and distance. So I know at some point, we're some of us need to get together and talk about to make sure the WSGA is consistent and have what we recommend in terms of course markings in this regard with this new authority. So a penalty area is one of the 5 defined areas of the course, and there are 2 different types of penalty areas. And one of the nice things with this rule, with the rules changes for this year, is that they're very simple. You have a yellow penalty area and a red penalty area. So very similar to what we had before. We'll see the relief options are a little bit different with those. And then after that, an interesting kind of a philosophical change. If the color of a penalty area has not been marked or indicated by the committee, it is treated as a red penalty area. So a red penalty area, which is the most is the more generous towards the player, is now the default position, which also can steer committees as to how they mark things. That previously, the rules really, steered committees to say, look at every water hazard as being yellow unless it needs to be marked red. Whereas now committees can look at things more liberally and should feel comfortable marking more areas red unless, in their eyes, they really, for some specific reason, needs to be treated yellow. The edge of the penalty area extends both up above the ground and down below the ground. So this means that all ground and anything else inside the edge is part of the penalty area, so such as bushes, tall grass. If an object is both inside and outside the edge, such as a bridge, only the part of the object that's inside the edge is part of the penalty area. Now, the edge of a penalty area should be defined by stakes, lines, or physical features. If so, stakes, and with these bullet points, notice they are all talking about when these objects are used to define the edge. So that means that, for example, with stakes, that you have only stakes, you don't have painted lines. The edge is defined by the line between the outside points of the stakes at ground level, and the stakes are inside the penalty area. So therefore, the outside points of the stakes would be the side of the stakes facing away from the penalty area. Now, when a line is used to define a penalty area, the edge of the penalty area is the outside edge of the line. So we're getting very specific there. Painted line can be, an inch or more wide, but now we're looking at just the outside edge of that. Or physical features, not ideal, but in some cases possible and necessary for practical purposes. When defined by physical features, such as a beach or desert area or a retaining wall, the committee should say how the edge of the penalty area is defined. So, for example, it could well be, out in the Southwest, some courses might say when you leave the turf, the edge of the turf or the edge of the desert against the turf defines the penalty area. So they don't have to put stakes and lines everywhere. That's possible. There's the potential for a committee for there to be a gray area and for there to be some uncertainty as to when a ball is in the penalty area, but that is possible. All right, when the edge of a penalty area is defined by lines or by physical features, stakes may be used to show where the penalty area is, but they have no other meaning. So all that means is if you have stakes and lines, which is customary, say at WSGA events, that the line actually tells the player whether the ball is inside or outside the penalty area, and the stake is there just to show players that there is a penalty area there, so that from a distance the players will know there's a penalty area there, and then that will help them estimate where the ball last crossed the edge of that penalty area. See there. So now, with all that in mind, Rule 17. Rule 17.1. Minor with penalty areas, there are two types, red and yellow. The difference, as we'll see, is based on their relief options. It's okay to stand in a penalty area to play a ball outside it. When the ball is, or when a ball is in a penalty area, when any part of the ball lies in or touches the ground or anything else, such as, say, a bush, inside the edge of the penalty area, or is above the edge or any part of the penalty area. So if a player's ball is in a tree branch that overhangs a penalty area, that ball will be in the penalty area. Let's see. Rule 17.1b. When if the player's ball is in a penalty area, the player may either play the ball as it lies, and this is a change for this year. Notice it goes on to say, under the same rules that apply to a ball in the general area, which means there are no special rules limiting how a ball may be played from a penalty area. So what is that? And so this is a change. So what does that mean a player may do? Player could remove loose impediments, could touch the ground, could test the condition, just as if, say, you're playing the ball from the fairway or rough in the general area. So given that, what is the only significance then of a penalty area for this year? Just the relief procedures, because the rules for actually playing the ball out of it are now the same as for elsewhere on the course or from the general area.
One other change in that is you don't get relief from abnormal course condition.
You do not get relief from an abnormal course condition. That's right. But in terms of actually playing the ball, making a stroke, you do not. But as we'll see, actually has its own section. You continue not to get relief from an abnormal course condition. Or the player may play a ball from outside the penalty area by taking penalty relief, which we'll talk about in a minute. There is an exception, as we'll also see, is that if there's a no play zone in the penalty area, the player must take relief. All right, if 17.1c, if a player's ball has not been found and it's known or virtually certain the ball is in a penalty area, player may take relief under 17.1d or 17.2. Now, once the player puts another ball into play to take relief in this way, the original ball is no longer in play, must not be played. So notice that we're not saying that the original ball is lost. We're just saying it's not in play and can't be played. So therefore, if the player were to play the original ball, what is he doing? He'd be playing a wrong ball, exactly. This is true even if it's found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search. But if it's known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in a penalty area and the ball is lost, the player must take stroke and distance. Oh, but if it is not known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in a penalty area and the ball is lost, i.e. not found within 3 minutes, the player must take stroke and distance relief. So some helpful information there that had been in some previous decisions now is in the rule itself to make those situations more clear. So now for the relief procedures. The first point is in applying this rule, it has to be known or virtually certain that the ball must be in the penalty area. So once we make that determination, these are the player's relief options. First, the player may use stroke and distance, which the player may use for any situation. Go back to the spot of the previous stroke in play, again with a penalty stroke. Back on the line relief. So similar but slightly different procedure than what we've used before. The player may drop the original ball or another ball in a relief area that's based on a reference line going straight back from the hole through the estimated point where the original ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area. So and the reference point will be a point on the course chosen by the player that's on the reference line and is farther from the hole than the estimated point with no limit as to how far back. The player should indicate the point by placing an object. And if the player drops the ball without having chosen this point, then the reference point is treated as being the point on the line at the same distance from the hole as where the drop ball first touched the ground. Size of relief area measured from that reference point on the reference line is 1 club length. So with all that, and then with the limits of the relief area, and we're going through that a little quickly, and then we'll look at a diagram to help that make a little more sense, because this is different than what we've done before. The limits on the location of the relief area must not be nearer the hole than the reference point, and may be in any area of the course except the same penalty area. And let's just stop right there for a second before we get into that final point. So the key point, and when we look at that diagram on page 148 with the yellow penalty area, for the back on the line relief, the player is going to have a reference line, and then he's going to select a reference point. So the reference line goes from the hole through point X, the point where the ball entered the penalty area. And then the circle is the reference point the player determined. Because let's say in this case, he wanted to get back to the fairway and leave himself a good distance for a full pitch shot. So he determines that point on the reference line, and then, and this is the change for this year, he gets a club length from there. So you can actually measure a club length to either side of the reference point and reference line. So that is a change, and it's a necessary one, because as Dan went over last week, what's one of the requirements this year for a drop ball? It has to come to rest inside the relief area. So that's why there has to be a relief area in this case, which is the one club length area. So that is different from this year, or for this year. So when helping a player with this, it's a good idea when the player uses the back on the line option to have the player select his reference point, put, say, a tee down on that reference line, because then that will make it easier to determine if the player needs to redrop.
Has it always been not farther from the hole? Used to be not near the hole.
Let's see, where are you, Ken?
The first, right, 17-1D2, the first reference point.
Okay, that it must be farther from the hole. Oh, as opposed to saying not near the hole.
Yeah.
That is new. That is new. And why we say must be farther from the hole? I don't know if it's an attempt to be more positive.
When you get to one stroke.
Or, and sometimes it's perhaps easier to, frame things in a positive way than in a negative way, and that could well be, but that is a change in terms, even though it means something similar. So the difficult thing is, and this is something that Dan or I will highlight in a future issue of Wisconsin Golfer, is what happens with the player who does not identify his reference point. And identifying or determining the reference point does not have to be done physically. That's, for example, if the player simply says, oh yeah, that tuft of grass on the line, that's my reference point, that's okay. The player doesn't have to put something down. But if the player just lines things up, goes back and drops to the side of that, and then the player waves you over and said the ball rolled forward, do I have to redrop? Now, as a referee, how do you approach that situation? Well, first question is to say, well, before you drop, did you identify a reference point on this reference line? And if the player says yes, then that's what you go by. You see if the ball rolled forward of that reference point, which would mean that it rolled outside the relief area. And if the player says, no, I did not identify any point, I just estimated the line and the one club length area and dropped inside it, then as it says on the bottom previous page, if the player drops without having chosen this point, the reference point is treated as being the point on the line, the same distance from the hole as where the drop ball first touched the ground. So you go to the side, to the line to see where the ball was, which, strictly speaking, will not be at right angles just because of the geometry, but it'll be very, very close to that. And that will be the reference point. And then based on that, you see if the ball rolled closer to the hole than that reference point. And if it did, then it rolled outside the relief area and the player would have to redrop the ball. So this is going to be, this is a change. There's no doubt some players, or a lot of players, have received rulings in the past where they were dropping under this option. They dropped the ball, it landed, it rolled forward, and they asked the referee, hold on, it rolled forward. Do I have to redrop the ball? And the referee said no, because it didn't roll more than 2 club lengths forward. And the player said, oh, okay, and then played the ball. Well, if the player were to do that now, in many cases, the player would be penalized. So this is a change for this year. And I think it's something that is that we really need to emphasize. All right, then the final point in here, it sounds complicated, but it doesn't come up that often, but let's just walk through it. If more than one area of the course is located within one club length of the reference point, the ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course that the ball first touched when dropped in the relief area. So to go through an example, let's say a player is using back on the line relief, and that happens to put the player very close to the edge of a bunker. And the player drops the ball and it lands in the general area, but then it rolls into the bunker. What does this tell us? The player must re-drop the ball. So now let's say the player drops the ball the second time, lands in the bunker inside that one club length relief area, and then rolls outside the bunker. What's the rolling then? Is it a redrop, or is the player going to have to place the ball in that case? What do you all think?
Well, if it rolls outside of that one club length, get a redrop.
Well, I mean, let's say the first time it lands. Let's say the first time it lands in the general area, and then it rolls into the bunker.
Drop again.
Yeah. So is it a redrop, or is the player dropping again?
He's dropping again.
Well, let's see, because what does this say? The ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course the ball first touched when dropped in the relief area. So then when we go to Rule 14.3, did he drop the ball in the right way? Let's see. And that's... let's see, in terms of dropping the ball in the right way, the player must drop the ball, must be dropped straight down. Ball must be dropped in the relief area. Let's see, ball must be dropped. If the ball is dropped in the... yeah, so in that...
14.3C, parent 2, what to do if ball's dropped in right way, comes to rest outside. Isn't that what you want, John?
Yeah, I guess the question here is... yeah, has the ball come to rest outside the relief area? And I guess we'd say that it has. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
I noticed that this bullet point is essentially what Rule 20-2C used to be. Because if I dropped the ball through the green back then and it rolled into a bunker, I would have to redrop if it, using this year's thing, if it stayed within the one club length relief area but rolled to a different part of the course. If I dropped under the red penalty area rule and I could drop onto the putting green, if the ball when dropped lands on the putting green, it can't roll off of the green because that's a different part of the course, even though it's within the club length. And then if I dropped in the general area and the same thing, the ball couldn't roll onto the green because that's a different part of the course than where it struck the ground, right?
Oh, yeah, right. I mean, it's very similar to the old Rule 20-2C, and it's really there to protect the player, to make sure that in this case, when the player wants to drop the ball in the general area, that the player can't then be forced to play the ball from the bunker. Because if the player takes care, the player will ultimately be able to play the ball from the general area and will not be forced to play from somewhere where he didn't want to.
John, question. Isn't that all that is saying is that the relief area is not in fact one club length? It is shorter than one club length because it's truncated by the fact that there's a bunker on the other side or there's a general area on the other side. So the relief area itself is a smaller area. So it has to drop in and stay in that relief area.
Yes, I think that's a good way to look at it, Dan, that the relief area is not necessarily everything within that one club length, that for the purposes of applying this, it's that part where it's the area of the course inside the relief area where the ball lands. Is that a good way to put it, Dan? Okay.
It's better than the way I put it.
Question, so he drops it again,
Mhm.
and it goes back into the bunker.
Okay.
That's just the way the slope is.
Okay.
So now he places it.
Yeah, yes, then you place it. Because as Dan says, then the ball has dropped twice and it rolled outside the relief area. So, all right.
Back to your example, John.
Yeah.
The second drop, if he misses that spot outside the bunker, lands in the bunker, then rolls somehow out of the relief area, place it in the bunker.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Jeff. The second time, the player needs to be very careful about where he drops the ball. Because if he wants, as I think most players would do, unless it's an odd situation, assuming he wants to drop the ball in the general area, but let's say he's not even from knee high very accurate with that, and the ball lands in the bunker, then he's stuck with the bunker. And if that was a second drop, whether the ball stays, if the ball stays there in the relief area, then he has to play it. But if it rolls outside, then he's going to have to place it where it landed in the bunker. So he needs to be very careful with that second drop. All right, so these first two options for stroke and distance and back on the line are apply for both yellow and red penalty, or for both yellow and red penalty areas. But then the next option we'll look at applies only to red penalty areas. When the ball last crossed the edge of a red penalty area, player may drop a ball in this lateral relief area, or may take a lateral relief. The reference point is the estimated point where the original ball last crossed the edge of the red penalty area. So with back on the line relief, the player is really choosing the reference point. He has a reference line that is selected for him through geometry, but here for lateral relief, the reference point is already determined because it's the point where the ball last crossed the edge of the red penalty area. And then from that, he will get 2 club lengths relief, but with similar limits that we saw for back on the line. It must not be nearer the hole than the reference point. May be in any area of the course except the same penalty area. But as we saw before, if more than one area of the course is located within 2 club lengths, the ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course the ball first touched when dropped. So this is very similar to what we had before, but notice this is the only lateral relief option. So what option is missing for a red penalty area that we had a year ago? Opposite side. So, but if we look at that reference in blue, see committee procedures for a model local rule where the committee may adopt a local rule allowing lateral relief on the opposite side of a red penalty area. So, I think there were several reasons why that option was removed from the rule. That 1, it was used very infrequently. 2, it was not generally well understood, and it served sometimes only to kind of confuse people with how to apply what's ordinarily a pretty straightforward rule. But by allowing this local rule, this allows committees to, still allow that where necessary. Where let's say you might have a wide stream or a river going through a course, and it's possible that a player's ball might hit on the far side and enter the penalty area from the far side. It might not be possible physically for the player to get over to that far side to take either back on line relief or lateral relief, and this would allow the player an option other than stroke and distance. So, yeah.
Have you guys really thought much about how the hard card is going to look in that regard as far as that opposite side?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question with what will we do with the hard card, and it's a good example of something that won't really go on the hard card, but it would be looked at on a course by course and a hole by hole basis.
It would be advantageous maybe to have that lateral.
Yeah, and you're right, and it's safe to say we will see some holes this year where that's necessary, but it's the type of thing that if we were to put it on the hard card, then it would basically become almost a rule of golf for the season, and that's not the intent. Bill, can you think of anywhere we're going this year where you anticipate needing that?
No, but I know that the rule spells out that you have to declare each separate penalty area that you would invoke this local rule or adopt it. And so it can't be put as a general basis, and it even says that. Can I think of one? Off the top of my head, no.
15th village in Glen.
But there's probably gonna be courses that have it as a local rule at their course, so that you would know that probably.
Yeah.
Anyway off your scorecard.
That would be one. That's a situation. What you're trying to do is avoid, like John said, that if the player lands on the outside edge, you want to make sure that player can proceed other than stroke and distance. And if that's not possible, that would be a case for adopting the local rule.
How about 13 at Okanawha?
Well, it's funny. I was just looking at this big picture here. You said that, Gary. I was just trying to picture something.
That would
there.
be a case. If a player hit up where there's a path that has out of bounds stakes and then it came back in, now it's on the course. But effectively, in terms of how the player will play it, he can't because it's underwater, and his only option is to go back to the place, probably the team ground, hopefully, if that's where he hit it from, stroke and distance. And that's what you're trying to avoid, because then you just turn that penalty area, in that example, into an out-of-bounds situation.
Yeah, so it's really designed for situations where, for practical purposes, the player might not be able to use back on the line or lateral relief. Like I was trying to think even about 8 at the Bull that has the creek kind of meandering through the fairway, but in most cases it's pretty straightforward to get to either side to play. So you probably don't need it there, but I'm safe to say there are a number of holes in the state where it would be appropriate. And
I like this because this really, if a player hits it into the stream like you're talking about on 8, it forces a player to hit over that angular hazard rather than not having to by using the opposite margin. And that's sort of what the rules want you to do anyway.
12 at the bog.
12, yeah, that would be another one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there, with the diagram on page 149, we see all the relief options spelled out for a ball in a red penalty area. So the player could use stroke and distance, which in this case means going back to the teen area. And even though it's red, the player does have back on the line relief. So the player can go back. You see option 2 there. Remember with option 2, that new 1 club length size of the relief area, or the player can use a lateral relief, option 3, which is what players most often will take. But occasionally with a red penalty area, the back on line relief can actually be the best. For example, a sharp dog leg around a pond, where that option might allow the player to get it drop in the fairway rather than dropping in the rough when taking lateral relief in some cases. All right, Rule 17.1E, talking about a no play zone in a relief area. And as Dan has pointed out, the titles of the rules and of the subsections are so helpful with the new rules that this kind of tells you what you need to know. Relief must be taken from interference by no play zone in a penalty area. So in each of the following situations, a player must not play the ball as it lies if the ball is in a no play zone in a penalty area. So, what would be perhaps the most common example of a no play zone in a penalty area? Say environmentally protected area of wetlands that the course or the state or county government really doesn't want players playing from. If the ball is in a no play zone in a penalty area, the player must take penalty relief. So no option to play the ball. Or if the player's ball is in a penalty area, but it is outside a no play zone, but a no play zone, whether an abnormal course condition or a penalty area interferes with his or her area of intended stance or swing, player must take penalty relief outside the relief area or take free relief, but stay in the penalty area. So that the second situation is quite rare, but the first would be the one that we would come up with the most. And Bill, are there any, knowing the schedule for this year, which in the WSGA tournament schedule was just released 2 days ago and is filling up very quickly, but there's still room. So after that message from our sponsor, Bill, are you aware of anywhere we're going this year that with no play zones? Century World with the flower
Century
hole.
World has no. The second hole has a small area on the left that has always been protected by the DNR.
Oh, really? Okay.
I always wonder if the actual government agency got involved, but that's
Well, now it doesn't matter.
Now it doesn't matter. But that would be the only one.
Okay.
Other places, Rolling Meadows has them. I know. The other one.
The Oaks does, the Oaks. 15th hole with the Oaks, or 14th hole with the Oaks.
For sure they.
Yeah, there's only probably a handful, 5 or so courses that have them in the whole state.
Okay.
And most of the time, it's the whole penalty
Yeah.
area. I've found the wording very interesting of this. That part of is still 100%. That's still part of it.
I agree that I would think, especially with penalty areas, that I'm not sure to date I've heard of some in some rare cases, but I don't think I've seen anything where it wasn't really kind of all or nothing.
Right.
In terms of no play zone.
The Oaks on 14, it changes once you get up on the green side, it changes to a regular red hazard.
Yeah, and Rolling Meadows, the 7th hole, is the same thing. I mean, it's both a no play zone part of a penalty area, and that how they've marked it in the past can now be altered because of how they word this now.
All right, but then when there's interference by no play zone for a ball not in a penalty area, then we look to Rule 16, which Dan covered last week. So, now Rule 17.2, which tells us what to do if a player plays from a penalty area and something undesired happens to the ball. Either the ball comes to rest in the same penalty area or it leaves the penalty area and goes to a not so good place outside the penalty area. So first with 17.2a, we'll talk about what happens when a ball played from a penalty area comes to rest in the same penalty or in another penalty area. And I think safe to say with the increased latitude for courses to mark really what they want as a penalty area, that this rule will see even more use this year, in terms of, if a course has an area of just tall, unfriendly rough that the committee marks as a penalty area, players are going to try to play their ball out of there and they may not be successful. So this rule, I think we'll see a good bit more use than before. But the good news is that this really has not changed in a significant way. So the player could play the ball as it lies, try again to hit it out of the penalty area, or for one penalty stroke, the player has these options. The normal relief options, the ones we just went over. So for a yellow penalty area, stroke and distance relief or back on line relief, or for a red penalty area, those two options plus lateral relief. And when using back on the line or lateral relief, the estimated point to determine the reference area is where the original ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area, where the ball now lies. That could be with the most recent stroke, or it could be with the previous stroke. If the player takes stroke and distance relief and drops a ball in the penalty area, and then decides not to play the drop ball, the player may take further relief outside the penalty area using back on line relief or lateral relief, or we'll see one other relief option. And if the player does so, he or she gets one more penalty stroke for a total of 2 penalty strokes. Then we'll go through the next part, clause 2, and then we'll look at a diagram where, hopefully this will make sense. So there's an extra relief option for this situation. The player does not want to use the normal relief options under Rule 17.1D. The player may choose to play a ball from where he or she made the last stroke from outside a penalty area. So this is a very player-friendly addition, and this makes sure that, especially in stroke play, the player is able to finish the hole with hopefully limited damage. So let's look at the diagram on page 152, or we'll look at the ones on 152 and 153. At first, 152. The player hooked his tee shot into the red penalty area to point A. Then the player played the ball from point A to point B. So using only the normal relief options, what can the player do? Well, if the ball lies at point B, where would be the stroke and distance relief? It would be at point A. And as Dan talked about, when the player goes to point A, what's a big change for this year? He actually has a club length now to measure from the reference point. So he can go to point A for 1 penalty stroke. He could use back on the line relief, as we see at 2, or he can take lateral relief with option 3. So that's using only the normal relief options under Rule 17.1D. Now that last option under Clause 2 gives him another option that allows him to return to where he last played from outside a penalty area. In this case, that happens to be the teeing area. So the player from point B could go directly to 1, 2, 3, or 4, each for just 1 penalty stroke. So now the latter part of Clause 1 talks about the situation where what do we do if the player returns to point A using the stroke and distance relief option, drops a ball at point A, and then decides not to play from there. Then what can the player do? Well, then the player could use options 2, 3, or 4, but what's going to be the catch there? It's going to be 1 more penalty stroke. So therefore, as a player, what's the lesson? That if you drop at point A, it's a risk, right? It's basically a 1 penalty stroke risk. In some cases, that might make sense. In other cases, in this particular case, I'm not sure it really does. But in other cases where point A might be, for example, significantly closer to the hole than the other relief options, it might be worth a risk. Others, it's not. So if the player then were to come out to option 2, 3, or 4, it would be for a total penalty of 2 strokes, but it'd be 2 1-stroke penalties, and the player could have just come straight out for just 1 penalty stroke. So now let's look at the diagram on the next page, page 153, where a similar situation, but the one thing that changed is that when the player played the ball from point A to point B, the ball actually left and re-entered the red penalty area. So what that means is that options 2 and 3, back on line relief and lateral relief, will be different, because back on line relief depends, because both of those depend as to where the ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area. So if that moves, then those relief areas will move as well. So the key point with that diagram is just to show us that options 2 and 3 move as point X, where the ball last entered the penalty area, as that changes. All right, then Rule 17.2b, related but different. Player plays from a penalty area, but the player does something that where he's required or he elects to take stroke and distance relief because the original ball's either out of bounds or lost outside the penalty area, or the ball is unplayable outside the penalty area and the player wants to use the stroke and distance relief option. So first two situations, out of bounds and lost ball, the player is required to use stroke and distance. Third option with unplayable, as we'll see later, the player has a couple of other options, but plus the option of stroke and distance. So if the player takes stroke and distance relief by dropping a ball in the penalty area and then decides not to play the dropped ball, the player may take further relief under Rule 17.1D or under 17.2A. And if the player does so, he or she gets one more penalty stroke for a total of 2 penalty strokes. One for taking stroke and distance relief and 1 stroke for taking relief from the penalty area. And then it goes on to say the player may directly take such relief outside the penalty area without first dropping a ball in the penalty area, but would still get a total of 2 penalty strokes. So in this case, this will be different than the case where the player in the previous diagrams elected to use the stroke and distance relief option. Because we said in that case that it's a risk to drop in the penalty area. In this case, is there any, if let's say the player's ball's in a penalty area, the player thins it over the green, ball goes out of bounds. So the player, no matter what, at the minimum has the penalty stroke for going out of bounds. Is there any downside to the player dropping a ball in the penalty area under stroke and distance? No, because if the player drops the ball, he might be able to play it, but even if the player can't play it and decides to take one more penalty stroke to take relief from the penalty area, there's no harm. The player could have done that before, so there's no risk in this case to drop inside. And the reason for that is because here the player's operating under stroke and distance, which requires him to take a penalty stroke. So, but if the player say doesn't want to risk perhaps losing a golf ball, afraid that the ball will be dropped and roll into 2 feet of water and can't be retrieved, then the player could just directly take relief outside the penalty area, but then it would be for 1 more penalty stroke. So the reason if this player directly wants to come outside the penalty area for the next stroke is 2 penalty strokes, is that the player has 2 different things going on. There are 2 different rules involved. One is the rule requiring stroke and distance, whether it's for a ball out of bounds, lost, or the unplayable ball option. And the second is to take relief from the penalty area. In that case. Then Rule 17.3, no relief under other rules for ball and penalty area. Again, a great section title. When the player's ball is in a penalty area, there's no relief for interference from an abnormal course condition, for an embedded ball, or for an unplayable ball. Because, as we'll see, the unplayable ball has its own rules that apply outside penalty areas. So in those 3 cases, if the player doesn't want to play the ball as it lies, the player's only option is to take penalty relief under this rule, under Rule 17. However, if a dangerous animal condition interferes with the play of a ball in a penalty area, the player may take free relief in the penalty area or penalty relief outside it under Rule 16, which Dan covered last week. So best example of that application would be, say, an alligator. So that's Rule 17 with penalty areas and the relief options. Any questions on that? Yes, John.
In the local rules, there's the option of a drop zone, and it says for 1 stroke penalty. Is that just reinforcing the fact that because you're in a penalty area, you still have the 1 stroke? That's not an additional stroke.
Oh, correct. And that's a good point. The one thing, should mention is, more often than not, we usually have at least one of them probably per course is with dropping zones, that a dropping zone for a penalty area is allowed by local rule, and that would be for the same penalty stroke So if a player were to use the dropping zone for a penalty area, it'd be for a total penalty of 1 stroke, not 2 strokes, just for that. And that's another thing that, and I don't know if Dan touched on it last week with Rule 14, but with dropping zones, thinking about with the new relief procedures and dropping, did you touch on that? Okay, all right, then I won't repeat that. But that's something to brush up on that, like some of these other things is different for this year. What happens if a ball rolls outside a dropping zone and how the player would need to redrop?
It would seem to me that under these new rules, that clubs should make more areas that previously were through the green, as we would call it, penalty areas, because that would give the player the option of not being able to remove the ball from these. I'm thinking of the 15th hole at U Ridge when the grass was real high. The player would get in there, and he'd try and play out, hit one shot, now he's stuck. This, to make it a penalty area, then he would always be able to come out.
Yeah, well, and Ken makes a good point, and it'll be very interesting to see what the expansion of the authority for committees to mark as penalty areas, how that will change course markings. Because I think some courses might say, oh, this is great, but inevitably, and as is often the case with golf, sometimes change is slow to come. And, and also there can be a traditional aspect involved with golf as well. And some courses might be hesitant to change things dramatically as to how their courses play, that some might say, no, look, if you hit it left on 11 and you run into trouble, we want you to have to go back to the tee if you can't find the ball. Because you shouldn't hit it there, and it should be a big penalty. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see.
Speaking of University Ridge, that course will not be able to be marked for the state high school tournament because the Champions Tour is 3
And that's the way
weeks.
it's been the last 5 years.
One thing related to Rule 17, which I know Dan and I had chatted about, was sort of the situation with Ricky Fowler that happened at the 11th hole of the Phoenix Open, and how he really wasn't proceeding under 17.2. It was really a continuation of 17.1. Did you happen to see it?
Oh, yes. So the question because I didn't see the video, but I think Fowler took lateral relief from a penalty area.
Yeah, he had his third shot over the green and took lateral relief from a red penalty area. He then dropped the ball. The ball was in play at rest for 10, 15, 20 seconds. He went up on the green, and while he was up on the green surveying his shot, the ball that had been at rest rolled back into the hazard. And then he took relief again, essentially in the same place, and then made an all-world triple. But, I had some questions. Could he have, when he dropped the first time and his ball was in play, obviously it's in play, and then when it rolled back into the hazard after being at rest, he now has to proceed under the penalty area rule again. And at that point, the question was, could he have gone back to where he made his previous stroke, even though his ball had been in play under Rule 17 after taking relief the first time?
Oh, okay. I see. No, yeah, I know. I think you're right. In that case, he never actually played never made a stroke from the penalty area. So therefore, Rule 17.2 would not apply. So it's just a straight 17.1.
But he could have gone back to where the third stroke was played.
Yeah. If he's if he was concerned this might keep happening or something, then so certainly, because let's say where the last stroke he played was, let's say it was approach shot from the fairway, that is where the stroke of this option would take him, even though there was an intervening penalty stroke.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
So if he would have done that, he would have been hitting 5 from back in the re-chip.
Yeah, unless it rolled in, then he'd be hitting a 6 shot because you got to take the penalty stroke to get it out.
He probably ended up getting the best score in the hole he could have got.
Oh, it makes that putt for a triple. Yeah.
Okay, let's go on with Rule 18. Now, we'll start with several definitions here. First is definition of lost, which has been greatly simplified for this year. Lost, the status of a ball that's not found in 3 minutes after the player or his or her caddy begins to search for it. So first key point is the search limit is dropped from 5 to 3 minutes. And is, we all know that when you're officiating, you're helping a player search for a ball, 5 minutes was a very, very long time. And 3 minutes, I think, will certainly help things. Now, and then the definition goes on to address some situations that perhaps were not explicitly covered before, but are realistic. Now, if the search begins and is then temporarily interrupted for a good reason, emphasis on good reason, such as if players stop searching when play is suspended, or something you encourage people to do, or steps aside to wait for another player to play or for another group to play through, or when the player has mistakenly identified a wrong ball, then really the clock stops. Time between the interruption and when the search resumes does not count, and time allowed for search is 3 minutes in total, counting the search time both before and after the interruption. So now there's really just one way for a ball to be lost, and that is for it not to be found within that 3 minute search period. There are other situations where we talk about the ball not being in play, such as we just saw in Rule 17.1, but it doesn't say the ball's lost, just says it's not in play and may not be played. All right, now definition of out of bounds. Yes, John.
Does that include identifying?
Well, we'll see that in the rule itself. The rule itself will take what was previously in the decision, and we'll talk about how the players allowed some extra time to get to the ball and to identify it. So good question. Out of bounds. All areas outside the boundary edge of the course defined by the committee, and all areas inside that edge are in bounds. The boundary edge extends both up above the ground and down below the ground. This means that all ground and anything else inside the boundary edge is in bounds, whether on, above, or below the surface. Now, if an object's both inside and outside the boundary edge, then only that part of the object that's outside the edge is out of bounds. So those of you who've been to the PGA, USGA rules workshops probably remember a sign along 17 Mile Drive indicating Cypress Point. And part of the sign is in bounds, part of the sign's out of bounds. So what's the significance of that? That the part of the sign that's out of bounds is out of bounds, and the player's not going to get relief from it, but the part of the sign that's in bounds is an immovable obstruction, and the player would get relief from that part of the sign. Yeah, so for the next WSGA outing at Cypress Point, let's all keep that in mind.
Yeah.
All right, the boundary edge should be defined by boundary objects or lines. When defined by stakes or a fence, the boundary edge is defined by the line between the course side points of the stakes or fence posts at ground level. When defined by other objects, such as a wall, or when the committee wishes to treat a boundary fence in a different way, the committee should define what the boundary edge is. So, for example, with the wall, whether it's might be the outside face or inside face of the wall, the committee needs to say. If the committee were to say, the wall to the right of hole 15 defines out of bounds, that's not enough, because the definition itself doesn't say in the case of a wall which face of the wall defines out of bounds. Now, if a painted line on the ground is used to define out of bounds, the boundary edge is the course side edge of the line, and the line itself is out of bounds. Again, very specific, because lines can be useful to define out of bounds, such as perhaps around a clubhouse area where it's taking a circuitous route, and or you don't necessarily want to clutter up the look by adding a dozen stakes right in front of the clubhouse. That sometimes the committee might paint a line to define out of bounds, and benefit of that is that line's not going to be removed. But when you look at this provision, let's say a boundary line is, let's say it's not the crispest of lines. Let's say the line is 2 inches wide and a ball is entirely on the line, but all of the ball is beyond the course edge of the line. Is that ball going to be in bounds or out of bounds? That's going to be out of bounds, because what really determines the boundary edge? It's the course edge of that line. And so the line itself is out of bounds. All right, next definition, provisional ball on page 216. Pretty straightforward. It's another ball played in case the ball just played by the player might be out of bounds or might be lost on the course outside a penalty area. It's not the player's ball in play unless it becomes the ball in play, as we'll see. And final one, and we've already alluded to it several times, is stroke and distance. A new defined term just for a procedure that penalty and procedure we all know all too well. The procedure and penalty when a player takes relief under Rule 17 for penalty areas, 18 for lost or out of bounds, or 19 for unplayable, by playing a ball from where the previous stroke was made. Term means the player gets a penalty stroke and loses the benefit of any gain distance towards the hole, because the player has to play from where he last played. So with that in mind, let's now look at the rule itself. The purpose of the rule covers taking relief from stroke and distance, talk about what to do if ball's lost outside a penalty area or is out of bounds, and also how to play a provisional ball to save time. So 18.1, again, title says it all. Relief under penalty of stroke and distance allowed at any time. And anytime you see the word any, that's an extreme term, and that means absolutely what it means, at any time. Player may take stroke and distance relief. So one penalty stroke and play the original ball or another ball from where the previous stroke was made. And last week, on Rule 14, Dan talked about how the player will go about putting that ball into play. The player always has the stroke and distance relief option, no matter where the ball is on the course, and even if a rule requires the player to take relief in a certain way or to play a ball from a certain place. So if a player's ball is on a cart path, and in Rule 16 allows the player to take relief from the path, if for some reason the player wants to take stroke and distance relief, the player may. But then similar to what we saw under Rule 17, once the player puts another ball in play under penalty of stroke and distance, the original ball is no longer in play and must not be played. So if the player were to play that ball, as we said earlier, the player would be playing a wrong ball. This is true even if the original ball is then found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search time. So let's take the case where a player goes forward, searches for 2 minutes, and then let's say the player just played a pitch shot from the fairway and had shanked it, so the player doesn't have far to go. So he goes back to where he just played the pitch shot from, figuring, geez, this is not good, I'm never going to find that. Drops another ball at that point, intending for it to be in play under stroke and distance. And then another player says, well, hey, John, found your ball over here before the 3-minute search period is up. So what is the ruling in that case?
The original ball is not in play.
Yeah, the original ball is no longer in play, and the drop ball is in play under stroke and distance. So the player would have to continue with that drop ball. But this provision does not apply to a ball to be played from where the previous stroke was made when the player announces he or she's playing a provisional ball or in stroke play plays a second ball. All right. Procedure when a ball is lost or out of bounds. Very straightforward. Stroke and distance relief must be taken. A ball is lost if it's not found within 3 minutes of search. If a ball is found in that time, but and this touches on what John asked. If a ball is found in that time within 3 minutes, but it's uncertain whether it's the player's ball, the player must promptly attempt to identify the ball and is allowed a reasonable time to do so, even if that happens after the 3-minute search period. So let's say if Arnold and I are playing together, we're searching for my ball. Arnold and I are 20 yards apart at the 250 mark. Arnold says, "Hey, John, found a ball." And I said, "Is it, a Titleist 3 with 2 orange dots?" He says, I can't tell. So then I walk over there and then I lift the ball to identify it and all this. And I say, "Yep, that is mine. Thanks, Arnold." But all this doesn't take place until, say, 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Is that okay? Answer is yes, that's okay. That ball is not lost. So player must promptly attempt to identify the ball, which includes a reasonable time to do so, and this also includes a reasonable time to get to the ball. And if the player does not identify the ball in that reasonable time, then the ball is lost. Now, when is a ball out of bounds? Ball's out of bounds only when all of it is outside the boundary edge of the course. Now, a ball is in bounds when any part of the ball lies in or touches the ground or anything else, such as a bush inside the boundary edge or is above the boundary edge or any other part of the course. Player may stand out of bounds to play a ball on the course. So we look at the diagram, top of page 157, where on the left-hand side, we have only the stakes defining out of bounds. So the nice dark green line is based on the outside edge of those stakes, and that's what determines whether a ball is in or out. So all of the ball needs to be beyond that thin dark green line in order for the ball to be out of bounds. So that's why that top ball with the check mark is in bounds, because all of it is not beyond that dark green line. Then on the right-hand diagram, we have a painted line on the ground to determine if to define out of bounds. As we touched on earlier, that's why that right-hand ball with the X is out of bounds, because it's the golf course edge of the white line that defines out of bounds. And if the entire ball is beyond that edge of that line, then the ball is out of bounds. So that's why that right-hand ball with the X is out of bounds, but the ball above it and to the right with the check mark is in bounds, because part of that ball is in bounds and all of it is not yet beyond that edge. All right, rule 18.2b, what to do when ball is lost or out of bounds. Well, as we've said, the player must take stroke and distance relief, 1 penalty stroke, and play a ball from where the previous stroke was made. An exception, player may substitute another ball under another rule when it's known or virtually certain what happened to that ball. So there's some rules that we've seen that allow where the player does not find the ball, but it's known or virtually certain that something specific happened to the ball. The player is allowed other relief if he or she wishes, such as if the ball was moved by an outside influence. So if player hits the ball into a crowd and it's virtually certain that a spectator picked up that ball and ran away with it, the player does not have to take stroke and distance relief. If the ball came to rest in or on a movable obstruction or an abnormal course condition and the ball can't be found, such as the ball's in a huge area of temporary water, and it's known or virtually certain that it's in there, but the player cannot actually find the ball in there, the player is allowed to take free relief from that under Rule 16. If it's known or virtually certain the ball's in the penalty area, the player may take relief under Rule 17. Or if the ball is deliberately deflected or stopped by any person, then Rule 11 tell us what to do. All right, now 18.3, play of a provisional ball. First, we'll talk about when a player may play a provisional ball. Then we'll talk about how the player will go about announcing and playing the provisional ball, and then how long the player is allowed to continue with that provisional ball. So if a ball might be lost outside a penalty area or might be out of bounds, to save time, and that really sums up the only reason that this rule exists, to save time, the player may play another ball provisionally under penalty of stroke and distance. For a ball that might be lost, this applies when the original ball has not been found and identified and is not yet lost, and when a ball might be lost in a penalty area but might also be lost somewhere else on the course. So there, in the rule itself, the rules makers have embedded, the useful point that just because a ball might be in a penalty area does not necessarily preclude the player from playing a provisional ball. There's a lot of times the player hits his ball towards a penalty area, the ball might be in it, but there's also a chance the ball could be lost outside the penalty area. But if the player is aware, emphasis on aware, that the only possible place the ball could be lost is in a penalty area, a provisional ball is not allowed, and a ball played from where the previous stroke was made becomes the player's ball in play under penalty of stroke and distance. So a situation such as, I need to take the extreme case, the Island Green on Ken's course, Hidden Glen, is that a player hits the ball and he can't tell if the ball stayed on the green or went over the green. Is there any sort of reasonable possibility the ball could be lost outside the penalty area? No. So if the player says, I'm going to play a provisional ball, and the player, let's say, tees up and plays another ball from the teeing area, what would be the ruling in that case? Then the player would be line 3 in that case, because there was no reasonable possibility for the ball to be lost outside, and the player was aware of that.
Actually, that's no longer true. The transplanted rough grass there, and it's conceivable the ball could be in the rough grass and you can't see it from the tee.
Okay, all right. So the Hidden Glen example may no longer be applicable. So it might be possible for the ball to be lost outside the penalty area. Wow. Okay.
There used to be a 40-yard rule that if you left the tee box and gone more than 40 yards, you couldn't go back. That doesn't appear to be there anymore.
Yeah, and that's one thing we want to talk about.
But that's gone.
And just for emphasis, there's even an interpretation written on that. Interpretation, and you don't necessarily have to turn to it, but 18.3a/2, because this is a big change that we want to go over for this year. Is that now really a player can play a provisional ball at any time. The interpretation reads, a player may play a provisional ball for a ball might be lost when the original ball has not been found, even if the 3-minute search time has not yet ended. For example, if a player is able to return to the spot of his or her previous stroke and play a provisional ball before the 3-minute search time has ended, the player is allowed to do so. If the player plays the provisional ball and the original ball is then found within the 3-minute search time, the player must continue with the original ball. So I think, so in this case, this that makes officiating easier, right? There's no longer are there calls or judgment calls as to if a player is still allowed to play a provisional ball. As long as that 3-minute search period is not ended, the player is allowed to play a provisional ball, even if the player has gone forward to search for it. So that is a change for this year.
John, we have a question online.
Oh, yeah, Jeff.
The question is, if another player plays your ball, but that fact is not determined until after 3 minutes of the search, is the ball considered lost?
Yes. And in that case, and then that's a good question because it has many applications that whether, let's say, another player has played your ball or you're trying to determine if there's virtual certainty your ball is in a penalty area. You're trying to determine if a spectator lifted your ball, that to determine those facts, to determine whether there's knowledge or virtual certainty that one of those things happened, that that your knowledge is limited to what you know at the end of that 3-minute search period. So for example, to take perhaps a more common case, let's say a player hits his ball towards a penalty area, but there's a chance the ball could be lost outside the penalty area and say some tall grass, but might also be in it. Player searches, and at the end of that 3-minute search, it is not known or virtually certain the ball is in the penalty area. And the player slumps his shoulders and says, oh, okay, I've got to go back to the teen area under stroking distance. And then at the 3-minute and 10 mark, someone says, oh, hey, John, found your ball and it was actually inside the penalty area. Does that change anything? And the answer is no, it does not. That because at the end of that 3-minute search period, when there was no knowledge of virtual certainty, the ball was in the penalty area, the player turns after. The same would apply with, say, if someone else moved your ball or played your ball, that if there was not sufficient certainty at the end of that 3 minutes, then that does not affect the ruling.
John, with this interpretation, could a player just protect themselves anytime they're playing within stroking distance before the 3 minutes is up and say, I'm going to go back and play this as a provisional and let other people keep searching?
Yes. And I think part of it is in theory, why the change, and this is just pure speculation on my part, part of it's to simplify what had been a little bit of a confusing rule. And part of it was also to say, well, we're shortening the search time. So, let's be generous in when you're allowed to play a provisional ball, because in some cases that might speed up play. And that for example, take the case where there are a lot of people searching for the ball, and having one more person look for it might not make that much of a difference, but it might save some time for that person if the player went back and played another ball. So you're right. Let's see. Rule goes on to say, if a provisional ball itself might be lost outside a penalty area or be out of bounds, the player may play a provisional ball, but that second provisional ball has the same relationship to the first provisional ball as the first one has to the original ball. So what does all that mean? So let's say a player hits his tee shot into the right trees, plays a provisional ball, hits that also into the right trees. And then he says, geez, I might not find either of these. I better play another provisional ball. And then let's say he hits a second provisional ball, and thankfully it's in the fairway. So then what's the ruling if the player finds the original ball? Then he plays that. Now what's the ruling if the player does not find the original ball, but finds both provisional balls?
It's different.
And he can tell which is which. Then he will play the first provisional ball. But then if the player does not find the original ball or the first provisional ball, then he has to play the second provisional ball. And what would he be line with that second provisional ball?
5.
He'd be line 5. That's right. All right, so now the announcement of playing the provisional ball. That before the stroke is made, the player must announce he or she is playing a provisional ball. And this is somewhat of a subtle, but especially for referees, a useful point is that, the player doesn't have to announce he or she is playing a provisional ball before putting it into play. It's before actually playing that ball that has to be made. So, for example, imagine you're a referee, a player has hit his approach shot into the trees and, grumbles, and then immediately drops another ball where he just played from without saying anything. So, and this can be, kind of a touchy point, but, you think there's a good chance that he wants to play a provisional ball, but obviously he hasn't announced that. So after he drops the ball, before he plays it, what can you do or say? You can say, excuse me, is that a provisional ball? And he can say, yes, it is. So, so this provision allows him to, clarify that status before he plays. He does not have to do that before he puts that into play, which is helpful to, especially towards officials.
As a player, if you see a person about ready to re-tee without saying anything, and if you say, "Are you playing a provisional?" Is that advice to that other person?
Okay, so Jim, you and I are playing together. I hit one into the trees from the teen area, and then then you play, and then I tee up another ball, and you say, "Is that a provisional you're playing, John? Is that advice?" And the answer is no, it's not advice. It's information on the rules. It's kind information on the rules. It's friendly information on the rules, but ultimately that is what it is. Let's see. So before the stroke's made, the player must announce that he or she's going to play a provisional, and it's not enough for the player just to say that he or she is playing another ball or is playing again. The player, and again, this is nice specific information that's been taken out of the decisions and put into the rules themselves. The player must use the word provisional or otherwise clearly indicate that he or she is playing the ball provisionally. If the player does not announce this, even if he or she intended to play a provisional ball and plays a ball from where the previous stroke was made, that ball is the player's ball in play under penalty of stroke and distance.
With regard to this rule, there's an interpretation which I found very interesting that says, if I play, I'm going to play another one just in case, satisfies the requirement, but I'm going to play another one, period, does not satisfy. And I found it interesting that the word just in case satisfy the word provisional or proceeding under 18.3.
Yeah, so here we see, let's see, here's an example interpretation. Let's see, 18.3b/2 on the bottom of page 261. Just to hit the highlights. Other statements that make it clear that the player's intent is to play a provisional ball are acceptable. So here are examples of announcements that clearly indicate the player is playing a provisional ball. All right, first one, maybe not the most realistic. I'm playing a ball under Rule 18.3. It's the second one. This one Bill mentioned. I'm going to play another just in case.
Yeah.
So just in case, makes sense. And that is examples of announcements that do not clearly indicate the player is playing a provisional ball. I'm going to reload. I'm going to play another. Well, and that's really not clear, is it? That as to why the player is doing that. But to say I'm going to play another just in case, we can infer just in case the original ball is lost or out of bounds from that. Right. So that is a nice little expansion there.
John?
Yeah.
Above that, here's that paragraph, the interpretation, 261.
Mm-hmm.
It says, if there's no one nearby that could hear it, it does actually allow you to say something to someone when it becomes possible. Does that mean that you are allowed to go play the ball, walk up, and then say, "Oh, by the way, that was my provision"?
It does. The question for those online involves the final paragraph of interpretation 18.3b/1. Says if there are no other people nearby to hear the player's announcement, the player is considered to have correctly announced that he or she has the intent to play a provisional ball, provided he or she informs someone of that when it becomes possible to do so. Because that's, can be, a realistic situation where, I've hit my tee shot, we're all looking for it, can't find it, so I have to trudge back to the teen area. Then I get up there, I hit another bad one, and now there's no one around me. So if I now want to say, geez, I'm playing a provisional ball in case that one's lost again, that, we have to let the player do that somehow. And I think it's just an acknowledgement for practical reasons of how to do that.
I think that's also a good example of the assumption that a player is playing by the rules.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. As Bill says, that's a good assumption that players playing by the rules and the player's honest.
Oh.
All right, Rule 18.3C. All right, now how long are you able to play the provisional ball? First, player may continue to play the provisional without it losing its status as a provisional ball, so long as it's played from a spot that's the same distance or farther from the hole than where the original ball is estimated to be. This is true even if the provisional ball is played several times. So let's say, I hit my tee shot 250 yards up to the trees, but then I pop up my provisional, and then I top my next shot with the provisional and top it again. It might take me a while. It might take me several strokes with the provisional to reach that 250-yard mark. But it stops being a provisional ball when it becomes the ball in play under Clause 2 below, or is abandoned under 3, and therefore becomes a wrong ball. So you can keep playing it until you reach the point that's the same distance from the hole. Then you may not make any more strokes of the provisional ball after that. Now, when does the provisional ball become the ball in play? It becomes the ball in play under stroke and distance in either of these two situations. When the original ball is lost on the course except in a penalty area, or it is out of bounds. So that is obviously why the provisional ball was played. So then that provisional ball would become the ball in play if either of those two situations actually happens. Second situation is when the provisional ball is played from a spot nearer the hole than where the original ball is estimated to be, in which case the original ball is no longer in play and is now a wrong ball. So I hit my tee shot to a spot I think's approximately 150 yards away from the hole, and then I'm really angry and I just kill my provisional ball and hit it down there 100 yards from the hole. And then I go up and I play the provisional ball from 100 yards from the hole. And then Dan says, well, hey, John, just found your tee shot back here, your original ball. What's the case? What's the ruling in that situation? Then the provisional is in play because I've played it from closer to the hole than where the original was estimated to be. Now, if the player plays a provisional ball into the same general location as the original ball and finds both balls but can't tell which ball is which, then this rule tells us what to do. And this, you all will remember, was part of a kind of a very involved old decision, and now it's in the rule itself. If only one of the balls is found on the course, that ball is treated as the provisional ball, which is now in play. So it could be one ball's found on the course, one ball's found out of bounds, or it could be just one of the balls is found and the player says, I don't know, both were Titleist ones without markings. I don't know if this was the original or the provisional. Then the player will treat that ball as the provisional ball. So if this was with a tee shot, meaning he'd now be line 3 with that. Now, if both balls are found on the course, believe it or not, the player gets to choose one of the balls and then will treat that ball as the provisional ball, which is now in play, and the other ball is treated as lost and must not be played. So this applies even in the extreme case where, let's say, the player finds both balls, one's in a bush, unplayable, and the other is 2 yards away, very playable in short rough. And then the player could choose one of those balls and treat it as the provisional ball.
Question, John.
Yeah.
That example that you gave before, I hit a provisional, it's in the same general area as the original ball. So now I hit a an additional provisional. And I get down there and now there's 3 balls there. So, and I can't
Okay.
honestly identify. I mean, this, I hate to see something like that, but if it happens, I'll
Okay.
have to choose at the end.
Okay. All right. So,
Usually line
Playing, I'd like 5.
okay. All right. So good question. So let's say a player hits his tee shot into the right trees, says, geez, I might not find that, better hit a provisional, hits the provisional into the right trees, says, I might not find that, better hit a provisional, hits that into the right trees. Let's say all 3 balls were from the same, you pulled out a fresh sleeve of balls on the tee. So they're all, brand new Titleist ones without any markings on them. And to take the extreme case, let's say he gets down there and he finds all 3 balls. And they're all close to each other, so based on their locations he can't tell which is which. What does he do?
One of them's going to be the first provisional, right?
Yeah, and one of them, we know one's the original, one's the first provisional, one's the second provisional. And my inclination would be based on this to say, Bill, Dan, tell me what you all think, to say he picks one and treats it as the second provisional ball, which seems a little harsh, but this is actually a generous provision because you could make the case that all 3 balls are lost, you have to go back to the tee. So,
but at the least common denominator is one of those balls is the second provisional for sure.
That hasn't changed.
He's the guy that buys a dozen balls.
What would be interesting is if one of them were in a less advantaged situation, which ball would you let the player pick?
Well, so it'd be line 5 playing 6. So.
But that's extreme.
So if we look at the diagram on top of page 160, diagram 18.3C, we can see the player hooks his tee shot into the trees, plays a provisional ball, well short of that point. So it's okay if he then plays another stroke with the provisional ball. In fact, he's encouraged to do so to save time. But then if he plays from point B without having found his original ball, then that provisional ball becomes in play, and he may not play the original ball because point B is closer to the hole than the estimated position of the original ball. All right, now an interesting exception. The player may substitute another ball under another rule when it's known or virtually certain what happened to that ball. So the player actually has an option here that when his or her ball has not been found and it is known or virtually certain the ball was moved by an outside influence after coming to rest on the course, is in a movable obstruction or an abnormal course condition, let's say can't be found, or was deliberately deflected or stopped by any person, then the player is allowed to proceed under those rules. So the player may substitute another ball under one of those rules, or may actually treat the provisional as the ball in play under penalty of stroke and distance. So the player has a choice, and this is really a player-friendly situation because, among other things, this makes it difficult for the player to proceed incorrectly in what could be a complicated situation.
Is this in honor of the late Paul Hollingstead? Is this what he used to call the choosy?
Yes, I think Paul used to call this a choosy, and this is not a change, but it's spelled out more explicitly in the new rules than in the old rules. All right, clause 3, when the provisional ball has to be abandoned. If a provisional ball has not yet become the ball in play, it must be abandoned in either of these cases. If the original ball is found on the course outside a penalty area before the end of the 3-minute search, the player must play the original ball as it lies. Or if the original ball is found in a penalty area or is known or virtually certain to be in a penalty area, player must either play the original ball or take penalty relief under the penalty area rule, Rule 17. In either case, The player must not make any more strokes with the provisional ball, which is now a wrong ball, and all strokes with that provisional ball before it is abandoned do not count. So, the best example of this, which I think, many of us have seen and or remember, was the playoff at Torrey Pines between Phil Mickelson and Frank Licklider, when on the playoff hole, both players hit it left, kind of down into a barranca that was part of the general area. Both players, thought fair chance ball could be lost outside a penalty area, so they played provisional balls. And Mickelson in particular hit a very good shot with his tee shot with his provisional ball. In fact, so good that he was thinking, geez, even if I find that ball down there, I'm not going to do better than line 3 in the fairway, 125 yards from the green. So he yells down there, hey, don't look for my ball. But, marshals, they probably didn't hear him, but also, marshals are trained to do what? Search for balls. And they're saying, wow, I could find Phil's ball and I could be a hero. And so he doesn't want them to find his ball. But they find his ball. He's not very happy. And given the nature of the area, the only reasonable relief option for unplayable is what? Stroke and distance. So even though it's clear that stroke and distance is the best relief option for an unplayable, does he still have to go back to the teen area, or could he just continue with the provisional ball? Well, what does this rule say? That his original ball has been found outside a penalty area, so and on the course, so he has to abandon the provisional ball. So even if he wants to use stroke and distance for the relief area or for the unplayable, he would have to go back to the teen area and play what would actually be the third ball played from the teen area, and it would be his third stroke. So that is, a good example of that. And some people will say, well, why does he have to go back and play under stroke and distance when the provisional ball was played under that option? And part of it is that you don't want to have one of Paul's choosies in this particular case. Unlike the previous exception, you don't want the player to say, well, do I want to go back under stroke and distance or use another option under the unplayable, or do I actually just want to continue with the provisional from the fairway? As much as possible, you don't want to give the player a choice like that.
That probably happens at the state tournaments more often than any other situation, because someone finds a ball which winds up being the original ball.
Yeah.
The consistency of how we officiate that.
Yeah, and Gary raises a good question, and it comes up a lot, or it comes up, with some frequency. And as referees, and you tell a person, no, you have to go back to the tee. He says, well, wait a minute, I have this other ball I just played from the teen area in the fairway. Why do I have to go back? That it's an awkward conversation, to say the least. And I think, Gary, what you're getting at is if the player says, don't search for my ball, should, referee, spectators, volunteers, should they honor that request? And I'd say yes, if the player specifically says that, honor that request. But short of a specific request from the player not to search for it, I think it makes sense to search for it, for several reasons. One, to save time, and two, the very fact that it's a provisional ball, shows that the player, wants to entertain the thought of playing the original ball. If he knew from the very start that he didn't want to play that ball, he wouldn't have called it a provisional ball.
Exactly.
But the kid from Eau Claire, Longabella, on 12, he shanked one right. Looked on U Ridge, looked for it, got to a position where he said, I don't want to search anymore. Started to walk to where his provisional ball was, and then all of a sudden, somebody in the crowd says, I found it. And it was after he had said, I don't want to search anymore, and he had to go play it. He ended up taking a triple where he probably would have only gotten a double at the most. What you can't call off the search if somebody decides that I'm going to keep looking. Yeah,
and the player can request people not to search. But if they continue to search and the ball's found within that search time before, let's say, he plays the provisional from closer to the hole. That some people have said with Mickelson, if he yells down there, "Hey guys, don't search for my ball," but then they're deaf or whatever, they're just too far away to hear him, but they're continuing to search. Is there anything he could have done? Well, strictly speaking, what if he ran out in the fairway and played the next stroke with a provisional ball? Then that would be the ball in play.
In stroke play, you can do that, but in match play, you can't, because otherwise you could be playing out of turn. That guy can make you wait.
But even all they can do is cancel the stroke at that point. You're really saying that it's okay for that player to play from that position.
Yeah. But you're right. It's awkward that in a case like that, it's against human nature to stop searching for a ball. And it can be difficult, but all the player can do is just say, "Please don't search for my ball." And hopefully spectators, marshals, whoever will abide by that. Parents from someone on another team might not. I don't know.
Somewhat related, somewhat not related to University Ridge and this rule and the penalty area rule, having played it, and you've all been there. I mean, would you recommend that they play the woods on the back nine and the fescue on the front nine as penalty area?
That's a big philosophical question. And I'd be, I don't know, it'll be I think that's going to be very interesting to see. That I would be I'd be hesitant to do that, in part because just sending the message that, for example, even at Erin Hills, that's something, we have to decide on what we're going to do. But, one thing, very quickly we decide is that it would be very, very strange to say all our 18 holes are surrounded by penalty areas, and that makes you sound like it's a strange golf course. Not in a good way.
Sounds like a Florida course.
That's just odd. While there are friendly reasons for doing so, that just on principle doesn't seem right. But as I said, I think you, Gary, Dan, John, Joe, and I, and some others need to sit down and talk about with Jeff, what our philosophy will be. And then there's some
desert courses.
And there's some information, there's some useful guidance in committee procedures in the official guide here about what to mark and what not to mark, and as well as some things to think about that are not necessarily intuitive when making that decision. Yeah, Gary.
One of the things, just for the University Ridge standpoint, I can say from working a lot of high school invitationals and things like that the courses early in the year when the boys are playing are not necessarily marked, and they're playing by one standard, and now you get to the state tournament per se, and the course isn't going to be marked because of the Champions Tour event that's coming in June or later that month. So they've played one way all year. There is a side of me that says it would be nice if it was consistent, because the course isn't going to be marked per se any different, just as a side note to it.
So when you say the course can't be marked because of the American Family Championship, does that mean just no lines? Presumably you can use stakes. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, and then they're like on 17 and 18, we have areas where the stands will be, that we have put in a stake that signifies a drop zone.
Okay.
Or a drop area.
Yeah.
Which is permissible. You can
and I think
within a club line.
And I think in many ways, the expansion of penalty areas, I think one of the main effects will be that committees are just going to be a little more liberal, that when they already have a penalty area, they're going to now move that edge farther out than perhaps it was before, or to take specific areas that are just problem areas over the years. They've known that and treat it that way. But I don't know. I'm sure there'll be some courses that'll that are tree line courses, with dense trees like the back at University Ridge that will, mark all those areas. But I'd be a little hesitant to go that far. All right, so let's see. So that is it for Rule 18. Any questions on that? All right, well, we'll go through Rule 19 and then we'll take a little break. Rule 19, good news, no definitions. Second piece of good news, it's a short rule. Rule 19 covers players' relief options for an unplayable ball. This allows the player to choose which option to use, normally with one penalty stroke, but as we'll see, there's a new relief option that comes with 2 penalty strokes in a bunker. 19.1, player is the only person who may decide to treat his or her ball as unplayable by taking penalty relief. This is allowed anywhere on the course except in a penalty area. The reason for that is penalty areas, as we saw under Rule 17, have their own special relief procedures. So if you're in a penalty area, you look only to Rule 17 for relief. Rule 19.2, the relief options for an unplayable ball in the general area or on putting green. And then we'll see specifically what those options are in the next section for a ball unplayable in a bunker. Player may take unplayable ball relief using one of these 3 options, each involving 1 penalty stroke. And so the player may take stroke and distance relief even if the original ball has not been found or identified. And the reason for that is, what's the reference point when you take stroke and distance relief? Where you just played from. So the player knows that spot. So finding the ball will not affect that reference point. But if the player is going to take back on line relief or lateral relief, the player must know the spot of the original ball. Now, why is that? Because both of those relief options are based on where that ball lies. So if you don't know where that ball lies, then you can't determine those relief options. So the player has 3 relief options. First, stroke and distance, play a ball from where the previous stroke was made. Second is back on line relief, which is based on a reference line going straight back from the hole through the spot of the original ball. The reference point, and this should sound very similar to what we saw with penalty areas. The reference point is a point on the course chosen by the player that is on the reference line from the hole through the unplayable location of the ball, and is farther from the hole than the spot of the original ball, with no limit to how far you go back. So players encouraged to indicate this point by placing an object there. If the player drops the ball without having chosen this point, the reference point is treated as being the point on the reference line that is the same distance from the hole as where the drop ball first touched the ground. Size of the relief area measured from that reference point, so is 1 club length. So 1 club length on either so you wind up with a semicircle with a radius of 1 club length. But with these limits, must not be nearer the hole than the reference point, and may be in any area of the course. But as we saw with penalty areas, if more than one area of the course is within the 1 club length of the reference point, the ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course the ball first touched when dropped. So for unplayable relief, we have stroke and distance, we have back on line relief, and then we have lateral relief. Reference point is the spot of the original ball. The size measured from that is 2 club lengths, which means you could have a semicircle that is 2 club lengths in radius or 4 club lengths in diameter. But with these limits, just as we saw before, must not be near the hole in the reference point, which in this case is the ball's position, may be in any area of the course, and the same provisions about if there are 2 areas of the course within that relief area. All right, just for emphasis, let's talk about the penalty statement here. Penalty for playing from the wrong place is the general penalty. So what would be the ruling in both match play and stroke play if the player thinks he's taking lateral relief and drops and plays 3 club lengths from where the ball lies unplayable, just because that extra club length will get the player out from the bush? Then in match play, what would the ruling be? Loss of hole. And stroke play, what would be the player's total penalty?
3.
It'd be 3 penalty strokes. So the player has 2 penalty strokes, the general penalty here for playing from the wrong place, but the player also has the 1 penalty stroke for taking relief under the unplayable ball rule. So 3 penalty strokes total. So here we have a nice diagram on the next page. Player plays from the fairway, not her best shot, goes into the bushes, ball is unplayable, and she finds the ball there. So her relief options: 1, stroke and distance; 2, back on the line; or 3, lateral relief. And sometimes, options 2 and 3 might not give much relief. Now, what if then the entire side of that hole were all bushes? Then her best option may well be stroke and distance in that case. Now, 19.3a, we'll talk about relief options for a ball unplayable in a bunker. So the first point is that this rule does apply. Player may take unplayable ball relief for 1 penalty stroke under any of the options we just listed. So if we look at that diagram below, player plays from the fairway, the ball's embedded in the bunker. So the stroke and distance relief option would take the player back to the fairway. But note that the second bullet point, the ball must be dropped and come to rest in the relief area in the bunker if the player elects to take back on the line relief or lateral relief. So with options 2 and 3, the ball or a ball must be dropped inside the bunker. So either option 2 or option 3, still possible, but the ball needs to stay in the bunker. And then we have on the next page a brand new option for this year. As an extra relief option, when the ball's in a bunker for a total of 2 penalty strokes, the player may take back on the line relief outside the bunker. So in this case, that gives us now this special option 4. So it's still back on line relief, but this allows the player to get out of the bunker, but for a total penalty of 2 strokes. So the good news with this is this helps prevent the player from really, especially in stroke play, getting in a bind and perhaps having trouble finishing a hole with this. This ensures that the player will be able to finish the hole. So somewhat similar in principle, not really with the option, but in principle to Rule 17.2 for penalty areas in terms of letting the player come out of, in this case, the bunker, but for 2 penalty strokes. So it'll be interesting to see how often that might be invoked in any of our competitions this year. So just something to keep in mind.
John, if the bunker's unplayable, it's full of water, and you have to drop outside the bunker, is it the same thing?
No, in that case, if you're taking relief from temporary water, that is Dan talked about, that would just be for the 1 penalty stroke. So this is a player solely taking relief from an unplayable ball with no other conditions applying.
So basically, it's 1 stroke for the unplayable lie and 1 stroke for taking it out of the bunker.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's one way to look at it. As Ken said, 1 stroke for the unplayable lie and 1 stroke to let you get out of the bunker. And one thing that is interesting, this is the first time in the rules there's been a single 2-stroke relief penalty. That we've seen there are cases where you get 1 and 1, but this is the first time that it's just a single 2-stroke relief penalty. And that's trying to, walk the line between, being useful but not being too useful. So any questions on Rule 19? Yeah.
Do you foresee any potential times where playing from a wrong place and taking the relief for an unplayable ball would be a serious breach. For example, the ball's 7 club lengths. They take 7 club lengths out to the fairway. Would
Okay.
that be a serious breach?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, could we foresee a situation where a player proceeding under the unplayable ball rule plays from wrong place, and that could be a serious breach? And I think the answer is yes. And that let's, for example, look at that diagram, that first diagram, diagram 19.2 on page 164. That imagine that from the player's perspective, that whole right side of the hole were all, let's say, gorse bushes. And let's say the player, instead of what looks like a shortish approach shot, let's say this was a tee shot. So the player hits the tee shot 250 yards into the gorse bushes. The player finds the ball in the gorse bushes, and then realizes that, well, anywhere within 2 club lengths or even, let's say, 10 club lengths is still unplayable in the gorse. Dropping back on the line is still going to be in the gorse. Because let's say, to compound matters, there's a boundary fence along the bottom edge there, so the player can't go back but so far. So that the player's only realistic option is stroke and distance, so 250 yards back, and the player says, oh, you know what, I'm going to treat the gorse like a red penalty area and just drop where the ball entered the gorse. And the player does that and plays. That player has gained a significant advantage. Only place the rules allowed that player, so to determine if it's if the player's gained a significant advantage, say, okay, where could have the player gone under the rules? 2 club lengths, still in the gorse. Back on the line, still in the gorse, or back to the tee, 250 yards. So
about 3 club lengths out of the gorse. Is that serious enough?
I think there's the potential that if it's, 3 club lengths, it's probably, sometimes you weigh the fact that has the player really gained, say, a stroke advantage, from being able to play the ball to being able to hit a full 5-iron onto the green. And I think that if that's what you're looking at to compare, that I think you'd say that's a significant advantage. So I think, anytime you look at a serious breach of playing from the wrong place, say, okay, the rules allowed the player to play from here. Instead, the player played from there. How much of an advantage did the player gain? Yeah, John.
John, anytime you have that penalty from playing from the wrong place, you have the possibility of a serious breach.
Yeah, well, I guess one way to look at it is anytime you play from the wrong place under any rule, could be free relief or penalty relief. There's the potential for a serious breach. So,
and the benchmark is where the player would have been required to have played from compared to what he did play from.
Exactly. All right. Well, here, why don't we take a 10-minute break and we'll resume at. On the clock on here is not quite right. Let's say 10:10.
Yeah,
let's say
12.
Yeah, let's say 10:10, and then Dan will go through Rule 20.
University Ridge is gonna be a classic example of a course that's gonna ask us what we should do.
And I don't know if 3 and 4 are fixed yet, or if they still got underwater.
Oh,
Have you been there?
From last year.
You couldn't go from 3
Green
to 4. You had to go back up
Yeah, I
around the
heard.
tee and
Up
go
by-
all the way
up
around.
By the 6th green.
Yeah, it was just terrible. And the women's tee or the forward tee was completely gone.
You don't know this, but that was my old shortcut from 2. You could go over behind, like through the long stuff by
Yeah.
the 6th green and then go up
Yeah.
6 and cut through to 4.
I don't see how that pond isn't gonna be permanently larger there because of all the construction they got
yeah.
going there. I mean, the water's gotta go somewhere.
Right.
And that pond's just gonna stay bigger and bigger unless they figure out some way to go in there and dig it deeper.
The front's not gonna open until
Rebuild the
May
bridge.
So why?
The front's not gonna open until May 1st because they're redoing all the bunkering on the front side.
You read?
Yes.
But, do the advanced guys ever go in more than 3 weeks?
Okay, Dan.
Okay.
sometimes. I don't know if. Yeah, I don't know if some changes. I don't know if it's towards philosophy. It's they pretty much what they've done.
Because that would be because it talks about a ball being lost or likely to be unplayable.
Okay, we're back on. Here's the game plan for the rest. We're going to do Rule 20, and we're going to do it in a reasonable pace. And then we have 4 rules left. John is going to do 22 and 23, which because we think are the most important. And then depending on how much time we have left, we may summarize 21 and 24. All right, so what we're going to do now is Rule 20. Resolving rules issues during round, rulings by referee and committee. This is the old Rule 2-5, which was doubt as to procedure in match play. The old 3-3, doubt as to procedure in stroke play. And the old Rule 34, which was kind of entitled something nebulous like committee or committee procedures or something along those lines. Notable changes under Rule 20. Number 1, if a player does not announce which ball he or she wishes to score with when playing 2 balls, the first ball played is treated as the ball selected. Second notable change. Naked eye standard is introduced to disregard breaches that could not have been seen with the naked eye or were otherwise not possible to know. And the third change is after the result of a match is final or the stroke play competition is closed, players may be disqualified for serious misconduct. There's only 2 definitions. One is committee, one is referee. Instead of looking at them, they're actually covered in the rules themselves. So let's start with the rule, purpose of the rule. Rule 20 covers what players should do when they have questions about the rules during a round, including the procedures, which differ in match play and stroke play. The rules also cover the role of a referee who is authorized to decide questions of fact and apply the rules. Rulings from a referee or the committee are binding on all players. All right, 20.1, resolving rules issues during round. Players must avoid unreasonable delay. And remember, unreasonable delay is a new term. It used to be called undue delay. Now it's unreasonable play. Unreasonable delay. Players must not unreasonably delay play when seeking help with rules during the round. So what this is saying is if a referee or committee is not available in a reasonable time, who knows what that means, but you can envision the fact that if you're on the 15th hole at Erin Hills and you can't see anybody and you got to putt out, you got to figure out what to do. And this is what it's telling you. The players may protect his or her rights by asking for a ruling in match play or by playing 2 balls in stroke play. And you can't play 2 balls in match play, which we're going to see in just a minute. All right, 20.1b. Rulings issued in match play. Deciding issues by agreement. During a round, the players in match play may agree to decide how to decide a rules issue. So this is match play. The agreed outcome is conclusive, even if it turns out to have been wrong under the rules, and this is the key, so long as the players did not deliberately agree to ignore any rule or penalty they knew applied. So the example, the players are on a hole and they hit it into the water, the penalty area. We don't have any water hazards. And someone says, I think it's 2 penalty strokes. And the other one says, well, I don't think I get any penalty stroke. And then they say, well, what should we do? And they say, well, I don't know. How about if I just drop one ball here without penalty? And the other one says, yeah, I guess that's fair. They then play it. Once that hole's over, that hole's over. And the players have agreed to the outcome. And they are stuck with that, even if at a later hole they find a referee and the referee says, oh no, that's a 1-stroke penalty. You don't retroactively go back. The players have agreed to play under that and they're stuck with it. The exception is if they knowingly breach the rule, then they're going to be disqualified. Example, before the start of the round, both players say, why don't we play every out of bounds on this course? There's so many of them. Why don't we play them all as penalty areas? So if you hit it out of bounds, you just go to the edge of the fairway or the edge of the whatever, you take your 2 club lengths and you drop it. Both of them know that that's not permitted by the rules. The minute they tee off with the agreement in place, both players are disqualified. Even if they haven't gotten to a hole in which that agreement would be in effect, they are still disqualified because they deliberately agreed to ignore the rules. They had an agreement to do so, and they started the round. Then there's a but. But if a referee is assigned to the match, the referee must rule on issues that come to his or her attention in time, and the player must follow that ruling. So the point here is you need to know whether the referee has been assigned to the match or not. For those of you who have the official guide, if you look on page 422, this is committee procedures. And throughout Rule 20, we're going to look at a couple of committee procedures. And they're on page 422, and they are committee procedure 6C, as in cat. And look at number 1 on page 422. In match play, a referee's duties and authority depend on his or her assigned role. First bullet point. When assigned to one match for the entire round. So if you are in a match play situation and Bill says, okay, Gary, I want you to cover groups 1 and 2, and John, I want you to cover groups 3 and 4, you are not under bullet point 1. Because you have not been assigned one match for the entire round. Similarly, if you are, it's a match play and they say, well, John, go out the hole 14 and 15 because that's the troublesome area. You're not under that. If you are assigned to one match, then as the referee throughout that match, you are going to make whatever rulings come to your attention or are brought to your attention. But now look at the second bullet point. When assigned to multiple matches or to certain holes or sections of the course, as the referee is not assigned to accompany the match, he or she should avoid becoming involved in the match unless. The old rule, I believe, said the referee has no authority to intervene in the match. Now it says, in a less restrictive way, should avoid becoming involved in a match. And then it says unless, and then the double arrow, first double arrow says, if you've been asked to intervene, then you intervene. Somebody says, well, what's the ruling on this? You intervene. And the other bullet points are very similar to what it was last year. That is, there is serious misconduct, that is 1.2b. There is deliberate agreement to violate the rules, 1.3b, or, and the rest of them are delay of play, 5.6, 5.3, arriving to the tee late. So if you have one of those three things, then you can intervene in the match. If you don't, basically, you're not going to be doing anything. So if you are in a match play situation and you are not assigned to the match, and you see somebody taking a swing in a bunker and pulling up sand, you can't go over and say that's a violation. You have no authority, or you should not intervene in that match. All right, let's go back to the rules, 169. Ruling request made before result of match is final. When a player wants a referee or committee to decide how to apply the rules to his or her own play or the opponent's play, the player may make a request for a ruling. If a referee or committee is not available in a reasonable time, the player may make the request for a ruling by notifying the opponent that a later ruling will be sought when a referee or committee becomes available. While the term is a little nebulous, it says notify the opponent. You really have two component parts to that. You must notify the opponent, and you must give them sufficient facts so that they know what the ruling request is. And the reason for that is if you didn't have to notify them what the facts are, at the end of each hole, you would simply say, I want a request for a ruling. And then you go to the second hole, and you go to the third hole, and you keep doing the same thing, and therefore you would sidestep the requirement that you must make a request for a ruling in a timely fashion. So if a person is on the third hole and they take a practice swing in a bunker, you say, I don't think you can do that. And the person says, yes, I can. And the guy says, well, I'm going to request a ruling. You've given sufficient facts in that circumstance. But what you can't do is, in that same situation, and then later on in the hole, the person, plays incorrectly out of a penalty area or drops in the wrong way, and you don't say anything, and then you're going to the next hole, your ability to request a ruling is only based on that first violation or breach, because that's what you notified the request for. You can't then say, oh, also on the third hole, he did the following, because you haven't made a request for a ruling. If a player makes a request for a ruling before the result of the match is final, and then we got a couple of bullet points here. A ruling will be given only if the request is made in time, which depends on when the player becomes aware of the facts creating the rule issue. When player becomes aware of the facts before either player starts the final hole, so we're talking about anything but the final hole, you must make the request before either player makes a stroke to begin another hole. The key there is it says another hole, it doesn't say the next hole. So if you're playing the 14th hole and then by mistake you play the 18th hole, once you tee off on the 18th hole, even though it's not the quote next hole, you've lost the right to make your claim. Second double arrow. When player becomes aware of the facts during or after completion of the final hole of the match, the ruling request must be made before the result of the match is final. And this is a change. The old rule said you had to make the request before they left the putting green. And now you have the ability to make it, if it's on the last hole, up until the time the match is final. Bill, do we have an official position on when the match is final in, say, the state match play?
When the result is posted on the scoreboard.
So when the result is posted on the scoreboard, that's when it is. Now, normally in match play, you do not have a scorecard, or at least you don't have one that is of any significance. And so when you get done, until Bill posts that or Jeff posts that, you can make your request for a ruling. Notice the effect of that can be is that you can finish your 18-hole match, or at least finish the match, go into the clubhouse, get a ruling request from the committee, and the committee would say, well, you got to go back on the course. An example, you win your match 5 up with 4 holes to play. So you finished on the end of the 14th hole, 5 up with 4 to go. As you're walking back to the clubhouse, or maybe you actually are already back there, you look in the other person's bag for the first time and you see he has 16 clubs. And you say, Charlie, he had 16 clubs. I didn't know he had 16 clubs. And he throws up his hands and says, well, that's too bad. I had 16 clubs. What should the committee rule? The committee should rule, since the player didn't know about the breach, didn't know about the facts before, that the ruling is now made on a timely basis. And what do you get for too many clubs? That's the 14 club rule. You get an adjustment penalty. And it's 2 holes. I'm sorry, it's an adjustment penalty maximum of 2 holes taken away. So instead of being 5 up with 4 holes to go, the committee is going to say you're 3 up with 2 holes to go. So 3 up.
With 4 holes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You have 3 up with 4 holes to go. So you have to go to the 15th teeing area, and then you then play in from there.
And there's life
There's life.
in the match.
If a player does not make a request in time, a ruling will not be given by a referee or the committee, and the result of the hole in question will stand even if the rulings will apply in the wrong way. So this happens all the time. Somebody takes a swing in a bunker, the other guy doesn't say anything. They get done with the match, they lost, they're complaining. And so I'm going to go complain to the committee because I remember on the 3rd hole he took a practice swing in the bunker and he wound up winning the hole and blah, blah, blah. Well, it's too late. You have to make your request before either player tees off on the next hole. If the player requests a ruling about an earlier hole, the ruling will be given only if all 3 of these apply. The opponent breaches 3.2D1, which is giving the wrong number of strokes, breaches 3.2D2, fails to tell the player about the penalty. Secondly, the request is based on the facts the player was not aware of before either player made a stroke to begin the hole. And then the last one, after becoming aware of the facts, the player makes a request for a ruling in time. So take this example. The players are on the 3rd hole. A and B are in a match. A is watching B take 2 practice swings in the bunker, touching the sand each time. They go to the 4th hole, and someone's walking along with them and says, well, how come that guy took the practice swing in the bunker? And he says, well, I don't know. Can't you do that? And he says, no, you can't do that. So the person then makes a claim on the 4th hole because he says he was not aware that that was a penalty. Is that a timely ruling? No. Why? Because the player was aware of the facts. It's not that he has to be aware of the breach. The player has to be aware of the facts. Was the player aware that the guy had taken a practice swing in the bunker on the 3rd hole in breach of the rules? And if the answer is yes, he was aware of that fact, he gets until they tee off on the 4th hole to make his claim. If he doesn't, it's not timely. All right, next page, parent 3. Ruling requests made after the result of the match is final. When a player makes a request for a ruling after the result of the match is final, that means Bill or Jeff have put it on the scoreboard. Then you can only make the request for a ruling if, and we'll go through this, but basically understand that this is in effect fraud. The request is based on facts the player was not aware of, and the double point here, double arrow, the opponent breaches 3.2D, giving a wrong number of strokes, or 3.2D2, failing to tell about the penalty, and the opponent knew about the breach before the result of the match is final. That's why when you think about the concept of fraud and in the legal system, fraud doesn't have a statute of limitations because the person is bearing the deceit. And that's why you can make this request for ruling even after the match is final. But you got to get under those 2 bullet points. All right, fourth paragraph, no right to play 2 balls. A player who is uncertain about the right procedure in a match is not allowed to play out the hole with 2 balls. That procedure applies only in stroke play. So 2 guys are playing a match, and one of them says, do I get 1 club length or do I get 2 club lengths from this cart path? And the person says, well, I think I get 2. And then he's going to drop within 2, and the other guy says, well, yeah, I don't think that's right. And he says, okay, I'm going to play 2 balls. He plays 2 balls, they go in, have the committee decide. This is the easiest ruling by the committee because in match play, you can't play 2 balls. So the first ball, the original ball, is always going to count no matter what happens. Is the player get a penalty for playing the other ball? It depends on whether a claim has timely been made. How do you timely make the claim? The way you timely make the claim is you say, I'm sorry, you can't play 2 balls. I'm going to request a ruling on it. And you have to do it, if this happens on the 3rd hole, before they tee off on the 4th hole. So if you acquiesce in the opponent playing a 2nd ball and don't make a request for a ruling, the minute you get to the next hole, that request for ruling is gone. And when the committee hears about this, is all the committee is going to do is to say the first ball counts. That's it. All right, 20.1c, rulings, issues, and stroke play. No right to decide rules issues by agreement. So this is contrary to the match play where you can. If a referee or committee is not available in a reasonable time to help with the ruling, the players are encouraged to help each other in applying the rules, but they have no right to decide a rules issue by agreement. Any such agreement that they may have reached is not binding on any player, the referee, or the committee. And the reason, of course, is because you're playing against the field. And you can't have 2 people decide that they're going to play in a different fashion than the other 154 people in the field. In match play, you can do it because no one else cares other than the 2 people in the match. Parent 2, players should protect other players in the field. Notice the word should, not must. To protect the interest of all other players, if a player knows or believes that another player has breached or might have breached the rules, and the other player does not recognize or is ignoring this, the player should, and again it says should, tell the other players, the player's markers, or the referee. This should, there's that word again, it's not must, it says should be done promptly after the player becomes aware of the issue and no later than before the other player returns his or her scorecard unless it's impossible to do so. And then, interesting enough, even though these are all shoulds, it says if the player fails to do so, in other words, does not tell the player of a breach, the committee may disqualify the player under 1.2a if it decides that this was serious misconduct contrary to the spirit of the game. So an example of that is 2 players are playing. One person, it's not match play, it's just stroke play. And one player's ball is in unplayable lie. He's cussing because the committee did a lousy job marking the course. He says, I'm not going to play it here. So he just picks it up and he throws it out in the middle of the fairway. He says, I'm just going to play from here because I think that's fair. Well, what this is suggesting is if the other player doesn't notify them that that's a violation or doesn't in some manner bring it to the committee's attention, the committee has the authority to disqualify the player who has not brought it to the attention of the other player or the committee. And it's serious misconduct contrary to the spirit of the game. And again, that's a judgment call. This is not mandatory. It gives the committee the authority to do so. And then the committee would say, well, Mr. Player, why didn't you bring that to attention? Well, because I figure if I did, then he was going to lose, and that's my buddy, and I wanted him to win, and I really can't stand the other player because it was such and such, and I wanted my guy to win. The committee would have the authority to say, I'm sorry, that's not within the spirit of the game. You should have brought that to his attention. All right, number 3. Playing 2 balls when uncertain what to do. You may recognize this as the old rule 3-3. The player is uncertain about the right procedure while playing a hole may complete the hole with 2 balls without penalty. The player must decide to play 2 balls after the uncertain situation arises and before making a stroke. The key here is before making a stroke. So if you are uncertain what to do, you drop it, and then you say, well, I don't know if I dropped it in the right place. I'm going to play 2 balls. You're okay. If you drop it in the wrong place and then you play it and you say, well, wait a minute, I don't think I played that from the right place. I think I'm going to play 2 balls. It's now too late because the stroke has been made. Next bullet point. The player should choose which ball will count. Again, notice the word should. If the rules allow the procedure used for that rules by announcing that choice to his or her marker or to another player before making a stroke. And then we're going to see if you don't choose, it's the next bullet point. If the player does not choose in time, the ball played first is treated as the ball chosen by default. And this is a change in the rules. It used to be, I think it used to say the original ball counts. Now it says the ball played first. So you actually can make a strategic decision if you want, if your ball is in ground under repair or what you think is ground under repair, and you think you're entitled to a relief but you're not sure, you can actually play the original ball as it lies in the ground under repair, then take relief. You've now seen where the ball went and what your 7-iron did and so forth, and you can choose which order you want to play in. All right, next bullet point. The player must report the facts of the situation to the committee before returning the scorecard, even if the player scores the same with both balls. And if you don't, it's a disqualification. So this is a serious problem. What happens if you get 5 with both balls? You say, well, what difference does it make? Well, the difference is if you don't report to the committee, you're disqualified. If a player made a stroke before deciding to play a second ball, this rule does not apply. And then but the player gets no penalty for playing a second ball. We're not going to call this practice. We're going to say the person was simply uncertain of what to do. He did it in the wrong way, but we're not going to penalize him for playing 2 balls. We're simply going to say this rule doesn't apply, and that original ball is the ball that counts. Parent 4, committee decision on score for hole. This is a nice addition to the rules. This provision used to be in a decision, and when you read the rule was incomprehensible. 3-5? Is it 5? 3-3. 3-3. It was very hard to follow, but there was a rules decision that basically walked you through this provision. So the score with the ball chosen, whether by the player or by default, counts if the rules allow the procedure used for that ball, if the procedure allows the rules used. So as an example, your ball is lying in a no-play zone, and then you drop another one outside and you don't say anything. Well, obviously the ball played in the no-play zone is not played according to the proper procedure. So what this is going to say is we don't care what you chose, the other one's going to count. If both of them were played according to the proper procedure, then the one that you chose, either by default or actually chose, is the one that counts. And then the next bullet point down, you just keep going down the ladder here. If neither ball is played in accordance with the procedures, the correct procedures, then it's the ball that you chose is going to count, provided it's not a serious breach. And if it is a serious breach, then you're going to count the other one. And if both of them are played in a serious breach, you're done, because you haven't had a ball in play and you haven't corrected the serious breach with either, so you're disqualified.
Is that sort of the whole 12 thing last year?
I think that was more of a case where a player played 2 balls and didn't hold out with one. And then he couldn't, in the ball he hold out with, he couldn't score with.
Rules allow the procedure used. This is a definition internal to the rules. It's not at the end of the book, but it means the original ball was played as it lies and play was allowed from there. So if your ball is in a no play zone and you play it from there, obviously your ball was not allowed to be played from there. And then part B, the ball was put in play under the right procedure, in the right way, and in the right place under the rules. So if you drop a ball that rolls outside the relief area and you play it, you have not played under something where the rules allow the procedure to be used. The procedure doesn't allow you to play from a wrong place. You haven't put it into place in the right way. All right, 20.2, rulings on issues under the rule. Rulings by referee. A referee is an official named by the committee to decide questions of fact and apply the rules. The referee's ruling on the facts or how the rules apply must be followed by the players. The player has no right to appeal a referee's ruling to the committee. The referee may seek the committee's help, but the player can't go around you. However, if you are in an event and you give a ruling and the player says, I don't think that's right, I want somebody else other than Gary Wild to tell me that that's right. The WSGA policy is that you should say, just a minute, I'll call the person in charge or the rover or somebody else, and you bring them over, and then you let that person have the appeal of the ruling done by, let's say, Gary in this case. So then if it's Bill or Jeff in the rule, they'll say, yes, Gary has done it correctly, and on you go. As a referee, I can't think of a time when you would say to the player, no, I'm not going to permit you to have a second opinion on this. I suppose it's possible. I suppose the example would be the player hits a ball out of bounds and they say, what's the ruling? And you say, you have to go back to the teeing area and you have to hit another one. And the person says, well, that isn't right. I request that you get a second opinion. I suppose you could say no. It may be better part of valor to say, okay, just a minute. Bill, yeah, we got a person here and he hit his ball out of bounds. Could you tell him that he has to go back to the teeing area? And then Bill says, yes, that's right. You go back to the teeing area. In other words, it's probably better, even in that rather silly situation, to give the person the ability to appeal rather than to argue that they don't have the right to appeal, because it's probably going to take more time to argue about it than it is simply to get Bill or Jeff on the phone or call the rover and have them give a second opinion. For those of you who have the committee procedures out, turn to 424, if you would, please. This is, again, we're talking about committee procedures. And you'll see the 424, parent 5 at the bottom of the page. It says referee warnings, referee warns player about to breach rule. While a referee is not obligated to warn a player who is about to breach a rule, it is strongly recommended that a referee should do so whenever there's a possibility in order to prevent a player from getting a penalty. That is the WSGA's policy. So if you are on the course and you see a player tee off or about to tee off in front of the tee markers and you're standing right there, you should not remain quiet. You should say, sir or ma'am, it looks like you're teeing off in front of the tee markers. You may want to put it back. Similarly, if the person plays a ball from the teeing area, hits it kind of close to out of bounds, goes back to the bag, gets another ball, doesn't say anything, and tees it up, and you're standing right there, you should say, is this a provisional ball? And if the person looks at you and says, well, of course it is, you've now discharged that obligation. We know it's a provisional ball, and you have prevented the player from getting, not necessarily a penalty, but if he finds the ball in play and he hasn't declared it's a provisional ball, then that second ball played is going to be the ball in play.
Well, I'm hitting it just in case.
He could say that.
John, I'm curious, what would you say the correct thing to say to a player in that You say, are you hitting a provisional or are you putting another ball into play under stroke and distance? Kind of keep it as facts.
Yeah, and I'm not sure you need to say both, but I think if you just say, is this a provisional ball? And, you know, sometimes, you know, players will say, well, of course it is. Well, you know, why else? You know, then you might just say, well, okay, just want to make sure you're not putting another ball into play at a stroke and distance. And usually players will then realize that you helped them out.
Another example of this, and Jeff Perkle may appreciate this, there was an event at Stoughton Country Club, and I think it's the 13th hole, which is a par 3 over water. Jeff put in a dropping zone. The player hit his ball into the water, and he proceeds to go up to the dropping zone and place the ball on the dropping zone. And I happened to be kind of a fairway over, and I kind of yelled, sir, it's a dropping zone, not a placing zone. And the person said, oh, I get it. And he picked up the ball and he dropped it. Again, that's a situation where you can avoid a penalty, you should do it. Obviously, if you can't get there in time, so be it. But if you have the ability to prevent a penalty, the WSGA policy is that you should do it. 20.2C, applying the naked eye standard when using video evidence. This is a new rule in the sense that it's now part of the rules, but it was an old decision that was put in place. It was the old 34-3/10 decision that was put in April of 2017, shortly after the Lexi Thompson fiasco, where she didn't put her ball back in the right spot and then got 2 strokes for playing from the wrong place and got 2 additional strokes from scorecard error. And the question then came up, and it was heightened by the fact that someone had called in, and so they adopted this rule on the naked eye standard, and I think it was reasonable judgment was part of that. But anyways, let's go through this rule. When the committee is deciding questions of fact and making a ruling, the use of video evidence is limited by the naked eye standard. If the facts shown on the video could not reasonably have been seen with the naked eye, the video evidence will be disregarded even if it indicates a breach of the rules. And then there's the but if the player knew from some other reason that he breached the rule, he can't get out of it just because it wasn't seen by the naked eye. Now, an example of this was, and they used to show this in the WSGA, or sorry, the USGA PGA seminars, of a person was by this edge of the green and they hit their ball and it rolled up by the pin. And then they showed it again and someone said, does anyone see that that person double hit the ball? And you could not see that they double hit the ball. Then they have super slow-mo and you see the club hit the ball, space, follow through, hit it a second time, and it was absolutely clear as day, but you could not see it with the naked eye, and you couldn't even see it on video. The only way you could see it was super slow-mo video. That's what this rule is attempting to do. Now, it doesn't apply to the double hit anymore because the double hit is now gone, but it would apply to other situations where the player could not tell that they violated a rule. In applying the naked eye, you're going to be absolved even if the video would say that you shouldn't be absolved. All right, 20.2D, when wrong rulings will be corrected. If a ruling by a referee or a committee is later found to be wrong, the ruling will be corrected if possible under the rules. If it's too late to do so, the wrong ruling stands. That's not a very helpful rule if you are a rules official. However, the committee procedures are very good on this, and so let's take a look at that. 427 of the committee procedures. And again, this is committee procedure 6C, and it's
rules, it's pages 427 through about 433, and it's how to handle wrong rulings in match play and how to handle wrong rulings in stroke play. This material on these 3 or 4 pages was all taken out of the old Rule 34-3 and put, or it was 34-2, somewhere around there, 34-3 I think it was, and then put into the committee procedures. Now, there's about 4 or 5 pages. I would recommend that you all read those. We're not going to go through it today, but we're going to take this example. There's 2 rules that you have to know, and you have to know without looking in the book. If you make an incorrect ruling on the course and the player has not played, you must correct it. Second rule, if you make an incorrect ruling and the player plays, you're only going to correct it if it's a serious breach and the player has not teed off on the next hole or an opponent has not made another shot. So those are the 2 rules. If you can correct it in time, you correct it before they make a stroke. If the player makes a stroke, then you're only going to correct it if it's a serious breach, and then only if the player has not teed off on the next teeing area or in match play an opponent has made another shot, another stroke. So let's take this example. This is a situation where the statute of limitations has long run on the player, and I'm hoping that the statute of limitations has run on the rules official as well. This was the State Am 2011 at Maple Bluff. And Bill assigned me to the 14th hole at Maple Bluff. Maple Bluff 14th hole is a relatively shortish par 5. The good players were going to the green in 2. So a player is about 200 yards out. He hits his second shot towards the green, a little bit of a pull. Short of the green, there's tall grass, and then there's an out-of-bounds cyclone fence, and they hit it in there. So the player's down there searching. And, of course, I'm a relatively new rules official, but I know enough how to work a stopwatch. So the minute he starts searching, I got the stopwatch going. The person searches for about 3.5 minutes, says, I can't find it. What's the ruling? Well, you got to go back to where it was. So I get the player into the cart. We go up to the top of the hill. Player pulls out a ball, and he drops it. Within 2 seconds, somebody by the green says, I found a Titleist 3 with 3 black dots. And the guy says, oh, that's my ball. Has my 5 minutes run out? And I pulled out my watch and I said, no, it's only 4 minutes and 30 seconds or 35 seconds. And the guy says, great. And I says, great. So I took him down to where he found his ball, dropped him off. I then go back up to the top of the hill. And as I'm driving up in the cart, I said to myself, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute here. This guy already dropped the ball. So that ball's in play. That was the old Rule 20-4. That ball is in play the minute he dropped. So then I said, oh, I made a wrong ruling. Well, yeah, but what do I do? So I pull out the decisions book, and I knew it was in 34, what to do. And so I'm reading through it, and it says if the player hasn't made another stroke, you have to correct it. And I said, well, he certainly made another stroke. Well, I guess I'm off the hook. I don't have to do it. So I read a little bit further, and it says, however, if it's a serious breach, then da-da-da-da-da-da. And I thought, well, is this a serious breach? Well, the guy was supposed to hit his 4th shot from 200 yards into the green, and instead, because of me, he was now hitting his 3rd shot from about 20 feet out from the green. So I very quickly decided that this was, in fact, a serious breach. So now I'm reading on, and it says, this is the rule I just told you about, I'm obligated to correct that until such time as the player tees off from the next hole. So I have my decision book out, and I said, I got to go tell him. And I put my foot down in the cart, and I look up on the 15th tee, and here's the guy right in the middle of his backswing, pow, hits it right down the center of the fairway. So So I then said to myself, thank God. So you no longer can correct. So one of the reasons to tell this story is a couple of reasons. One is we all make mistakes as rules officials. When you make them, you got to correct them until the player makes a stroke. If the player's already made the stroke, you're only going to correct it if it's a serious breach, which this was, when the player, before the player tees off from the next hole or his opponent in match play makes another stroke.
You are not the only person that has done that.
So I said earlier that I thought the statute of limitations had run on the player, and I'm thinking that Bill is now exonerated by air from 8 years ago. Is that right, Bill? Okay.
Everybody makes.
So rules officials, there's two types of rules officials. You may have heard this, ones who have made a mistake and ones that will make a mistake. So, and the third point I make about this is, when you make a mistake, do your best to correct it. If the time has passed when you no longer can correct it, let it go. There's no reason to run in and complain to Bill or tell Bill or Jeff, I made a mistake. You can't do anything about it. So let it go. And in my case, after 8 years, I'm just about ready to let it go. John.
But do you have an obligation to tell the player that he did it incorrectly? Because if the situation arises again, and he merely takes that relief, which isn't authorized, once he's dropped the ball, he has nobody to blame.
It's a fair question, and whether the term that you have an obligation or not, I don't know. I'd be interested in John's view on that. I don't think you have an obligation to tell him. The question that John is posing is, what happens if the person now thinks, because of a ruling that you gave them, that anytime you drop a ball, that ball can be played if the 5 minutes is not run, or now the 3 minutes.
You wouldn't have, you can go back and play the other ball.
Right.
Right, yes,
It's
right.
basically told him that dropping the ball isn't putting the ball in play.
So, John, the question was, I don't know if you heard my example where the player played from the wrong place. He teed off on the next teeing area. We all agree that you cannot correct the mistake and you should let it go. The question asked was, should you, as the rules official, tell the player, look, I made a mistake, you're off the hook, but just so you know, for the rest of the round and for the rest of your life, you're not going to get this benefit in the future, so you cannot rely on that for the rest of this round.
Yes, I mean, definitely should tell the player, and then it can be a judgment call as to whether you tell the player during the round or after the round. Because you're right, the most important thing is you don't want the player to continue to do that. And it could well depend as to what the nature of the mistake was. That if it was, say, relief from the red penalty area, and every hole in the course has a red penalty area, then I'd say it makes sense to tell that player as soon as possible. If in Dan's example, it's probably unlikely to come up the last 3 or 4 holes of the round. So maybe you tell him after the round, but it's a judgment call.
The operative word was should.
Yes. Again, I think that as rules officials, you should all read pages 427 through 433. These are the committee procedures. I gave you sort of the 2 rules that you have to know off the top of your head, but you should do the other ones. One more example, just to make this point a little clearer. Assuming you're the referee for the match, the 2 players are on the putting green. One of the player drops his putter and it hits the ball and it moves away, and then he looks and he says, what's the ruling? And you say, I'm sorry, that's loss of hole. Both players pick up their ball, they go to the next teeing area. Why? Well, the hole's over. Have you made an error? Yes, you have. Has either player made a stroke from the next hole? No. So that's when you correct it. You say, oh, I'm sorry, guys, that was wrong on my part. we're going to go back to the previous green. You're going to replace your balls on the correct spot, and you're going to proceed, and there's no penalty to anyone because it was the referee's error.
In somewhat akin to what Dan was talking about, you may remember this, and 3 years after Dan's incident in the state amateur, a referee was helping a player look for a ball and notified the player that 5 minutes had elapsed. And the player said, "Can I get a ride back in your cart to the tee?" Of course, that's what we want. Referee started driving him back, and like most situations, the player and the referee had been looking 50 to 75 yards too far. And when they were driving back, they found the player's ball. And the player said, "Oh, there's my ball." And the referee dropped him off, watched him play that ball, finished out the hole. And I don't remember, I think we were notified long after the player had teed off on another hole or the next hole at the time. And the question became, what happens? And I remember in resolving this, the player should have returned to the tee. But what happens at the end of 5 minutes, or now this year, 3 minutes, that you don't want to forget? Well, we're going to forgive him for the wrong place, including the serious breach. That player still got the penalty for a ball being lost, even though he wound up playing a lost ball, if that makes sense. And it happens. I mean, look, those can be strenuous situations. You're a little nervous. The player's more nervous than you are, and that happens.
And I think the main thing that we're talking about in this, and it's how I learned probably the most of the stuff over the years, is we used to use the radio a lot more. Anytime more situations would come across the radio that you could go back and study when you have doubt in your mind and read, and then you could talk to someone else about. And over the years, especially with rules education, I've seen less and less people use the radio when there's doubt in your mind as to a procedure. There's nothing wrong with getting a second opinion to make sure, because our job is to get it right.
Yeah, we definitely want you to use the radio if you're not sure. And if you are sure, we hope that you're not surely wrong.
All right, 2 more points under 20-2D. There is a difference between an administrative error and a ruling error by a rules official or committee. And administrative errors should always be corrected. An administrative error would be an example that you get into the scoring area and you add up the player's score and you give them a 76 and the player actually had a 74. They had every whole number correctly, but when you, in the scoring tent, added them up, you added them up wrong. That's an administrative error, and that should be corrected. And there's no time limit. So if you then give the state am tournament to player A, and then 3 days later we find out that we added the scores wrong, you have to somehow wiggle that out of the guy's hand, tell him that he didn't get it, and it really is player B who won the state am. Obviously, that's not a good thing, but the point is administrative errors must be corrected. And lastly, on the top of page 173, if a player takes an action in breach of a rule based on a reasonable misunderstanding of the referee's instructions during a round, there's no penalty and the instruction is treated like a wrong ruling. An example of that is the player's ball is in a bunker next to a rake, and the player says, "Do I get relief from this?" And you're the rules official and you say, "Yes, you get relief." And the player bends down and he picks up his ball to take relief. And then you say, "No, yes, you get relief, but you can't do it that way. You have to move the rake, not the ball." Is that a reasonable misunderstanding? I think so. You'd have the player put the ball back by the rake and then move the rake. But remember, it must be a reasonable misunderstanding, and it must be of the referee's instruction instruction could be, I suppose, nonverbal, but it has to be the referee's instruction that is the mistake. All right, 20-2E. Disqualifying players after result of match or competition is final. There's no time limit on disqualifying a player under 1.2, that's the serious misconduct, or 1.3, that's the deliberately ignoring a known breach. This may be done after the result of the match is final. When the committee will give a ruling when a request is made after the result of the match, we just went over that. So what we're talking about here is some sort of serious misconduct. All right, stroke play. Normally, a penalty must not be added or corrected after the stroke play competition has closed, which is when the results become final in the way set by the committee. Okay, Bill, how, for the WSGA, when is a result final?
When the results are posted, which essentially means we print off the result sheet, compare it to the handwritten or video board, make sure that it appears, and then the award ceremony is actually when the results are final.
Okay, so for the senior tour event, if you say, okay, I now have the results and I want to say who's in first and who's in second and who's in third, is it final at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you then get your third place $60, you get to keep it because it's closed even if there was some error. All right, but a player may be disqualified after the competition is closed if he or she, and this is really the same as the old rules, returns a scorecard for any hole lower than actually taken for any reason other than failure to include one or more penalty strokes that before the competition closed, the player did not know. So you can still be disqualified if you turn in a 4 and you actually had a 5 on that hole if you didn't have any penalty strokes and you simply misadded. The other 3 are, again, almost akin to fraud. You know before the competition is closed you had a higher handicap than you were entitled to. You knew that you had breached a rule of disqualification or that you deliberately agreed with another player to ignore a rule. And then the last sentence, the committee may also disqualify a player under 1-2 for serious misconduct after the competition is closed. That's a new provision, and again, it gives the committee to say, this just wasn't right, this is a serious misconduct, you are disqualified. And then 20.3, you may recognize this. This is the old 1-4, which was everybody's favorite rule, the rule on equity. And basically what it's saying is you're treating the situation in the same way that is reasonable, fair, and consistent with how similar situations are treated under the rules. So hopefully we don't need many of those. John, you want to?
Yeah. We're going to do 22. All right, well, thank you, Dan. And what we will do now, in the interest of time, in part, because I have to leave by 12 for to go to the airport, is we'll cover rules 21 through 24, but we'll start with 22 and 23 since they're a little more involved. And then Dan will finish things up with 21 and 24. And we might be very quick with some of that. Start with Rule 22, dealing with foursomes. And these are, while rules 1 through 20 were written with individual stroke play and match play in mind, rules 21 through 24 are certainly important because the WSGA is involved with, in one way or another, whether it's by hosting championships or by helping out with, say, high school and collegiate events with forms of play involved with all 4 of these rules. So let's go over these. As I said, apologize somewhat briefly, but we thought that it probably wasn't worthwhile to have a separate session just for these 4 rules. Rule 22, covering foursomes, also known as alternate shot. That the high points, Rule 22.2. As both players compete as one side playing only one ball, either partner may take any action allowed for the side before the stroke is made, such as to mark the spot of the ball and lift it, replace, drop, or place the ball, no matter which partner's turn it is to play next. And this provision really simplifies, a previous provision in the rules that really no one knew for sure what it meant. So that's progress. A partner and his or her caddy may help the other partner in any way that the other partner's caddy is allowed to help, but must not give any help that the other partner's caddy is not allowed to give. So in other words, the partner and the partner's caddy can do what the player's own caddy is allowed to do, but may not do what the player's own caddy is not allowed to do. Any action taken or breach of the rules by either partner or either caddy applies to the side. And then we say that in stroke play, where we have a scorecard, just one of the two partners needs to certify the score at the end of the round. As we know, the side will alternate in making the stroke, with one partner playing first on the odd-numbered holes and the other partner playing first from the even-numbered holes. During the play of the holes, they alternate strokes. Now, if a stroke is canceled or otherwise does not count, then the same partner who made the stroke must make the next stroke for the side. So in foursome match play, for example, if Bill and I are partners and it's my turn to play for us, but I play out of turn because it was our opponent's turn to play and they decide to have us cancel and replay the stroke in the correct order, then I would play that, make that stroke again. If decides to play a provisional ball, it's played by the other partner, the partner's turn, who would play next. Because, as we'll see, penalty strokes do not affect the order of play. Now, penalty for playing in the incorrect order is the general penalty. So in match play, it's straightforward. It's just loss of hole. But in stroke play, this is a situation where the side needs to correct the mistake or be disqualified. All right, Rule 22.4. The side may choose which partner will play first from the first teeing area, and that's certainly one of the kind of fun aspects of foursome play is the strategy, figuring, deciding if that particular golf course favors one partner on the odd-numbered holes over the others, unless the terms of the competition say which partner must play first. So, for example, just to create some order, if there's a mixed foursome competition, the committee might say that the females play first on the odds and the males play first on the evens, or something like that. The committee doesn't have to, but it may say that if it wishes. The sides round starts when that partner makes a stroke, start the side's first hole. All right, starting time. The starting time rule applies differently to each partner based on who will play first for the side. The partner who will play first must be ready to play at the starting time and starting point and must start at and not before that time. The partner who will play second must be present at the starting time, either at the starting point or on the hole near where the ball played from the teeing area is expected to come to rest. So in other words, if Bill and I are partners and Bill is to play first, is to start a round at the first tee, he has to be at the first tee. But if I want to be efficient, or perhaps maybe I'm lazy and instead of being at the first tee, I'm already out the first fairway where I'm hoping his tee shot will come to rest, then that's okay too. And partners in foursomes may share clubs as long as between the two of us, we do not have more than 14 clubs. So that's foursomes play pretty quickly. It's a fun form of play. When played properly, it can actually be a quicker form of play than just singles match play. Any questions on that? All right, Rule 23, which, as you can tell, is a little more involved, and there's a lot going on here with four-ball play, which can be in match play or stroke play. So we have two partners competing as a side, and each player plays his or her own ball, and the side score for the hole is the lower score of the two partners for that. 23.2, scoring in four ball. How to determine the side score for the hole. Well, let's go through the various situations. When both partners hole out or otherwise complete the hole, then the lower score is their score for the hole. If only one partner holes out, then that partner's score is the score for the hole. And that's one of the nice things about four ball play is if you're having a bad hole and your partner's not, to help pace a play and for your own peace of mind, you can pick up. But the third issue is where there can be an real problem if neither partner holes out or otherwise completes the hole. So otherwise completes the hole could mean, keep in mind, this could be four ball match play where strokes conceded, right? But if neither partner holes out or completes the hole, then the side doesn't have a score for the hole. So in match play, it will be straightforward. They're going to lose the hole. In stroke play, it's also straightforward, but in a severe way, that they are disqualified. They do not have a score for the hole. 23.2b, the scorecard in stroke play, which is not needed in match play. The side's gross scores for each hole must be entered on a single scorecard, and if it's a handicap competition, each partner's handicap must be entered on the scorecard. Then for each hole, the gross score of at least one partner must be entered. There's no penalty for entering more than one partner score on the scorecard. So if you want to be safe and for some reason or just out of curiosity, out of habit, enter both scores, like you see with the diagram on the next page. First hole, Kate scored a 4, John scored a 5, so we know the side score for the hole is 4, but there's no problem with entering John's score as well. Each score on the scorecard must be clearly identified as the score of the individual partner who made it. If that's not done, then they are disqualified. So the committee needs to be able to tell that on the first hole, for example, that Kate is the one who scored 4. Only one partner needs to certify the whole scores on the scorecard, so i.e. to sign the scorecard. And the committee has a lot of responsibility for this. Committee is responsible for deciding which score counts and in applying the handicaps. So if only one score is entered for a hole, then that will be the score that counts for that side. Now, if the scores of both partners are entered for the hole, then the committee is going to look at it this way. If the scores are different, then the lower score, gross or net, will count. If the scores are the same, then the committee may count either score. And if the score used is found to be wrong for any reason, the committee will count the other score. So that works well. So if Bill and I are both partners and we each return a 4 for, let's say, the first hole, and then the committee later realizes that, whoa, hold on, Bill actually made a 5 on that hole, that we're okay, that we had one legitimate 4 for that hole. So our scorecard was correct in that regard, and we're not going to be penalized. But if the score that counts for the side is not clearly identified as the score of one of the two partners, or if that partner is disqualified relating to play of that hole, then the side would be disqualified. All right, exception regarding Rule 11.2 in a 4-ball play. We've seen this in a few places where, and think about what happened at the President's Cup with Jordan Spieth in 2017. When a player's partner has already completed the hole and the player's ball in motion needs to be holed to lower the side score for the hole by 1 stroke, so a very specific set of circumstances. If any person deliberately deflects or stops the ball at any time when there is no reasonable chance it can be holed, there's no penalty to that person, and the player's ball does not count for that side. So if you remember what happened at the President's Cup when one player from the international team had a putt or had a stroke from behind the green to better his partner's score by 1, it's going past the hole, and while it's still moving, Jordan Spieth, just as a courtesy, stopped the ball to pick it up and return it to the person. At the time, that was a breach, which philosophically doesn't make sense, but that was the ruling at the time. But now, because of this, there would be no penalty. So when we look at the scorecard in that diagram, we can see what the player and the marker are responsible for the hole by hole gross scores. And note, there doesn't have to be a score for both partners at each hole. It just needs to make sure that there is at least a score for one partner per hole. Then the committee will determine what their 4-ball score is for each hole. When the round starts, the sides round starts when one of the partners makes a stroke to start the first hole. And the round ends in match play when either side has won the match. In stroke play when the side completes the final hole, or when either by both partners holing out, or by one partner holing out the final hole and the other partner choosing not to do so. Now, a hole is completed in match play when both partners have holed out or had their next strokes conceded, or either side has conceded the hole, or in stroke play if a side's completed a hole when one of the partners is holed out and the other partner is either holed out or has chosen not to hole out. All right. Now, when one or both partners may represent the side and when an absent partner may join his partner. Well, because it's 4-ball play, you just need to make sure you have at least one partner during the match. It's not necessary for both partners to be present at the same time for the full match. Now, if a partner is absent and then arrives to play, that partner may start play for the side only between the play of 2 holes. And that has a different application in match play and in stroke play. So in match play, the absent partner may join before any player in the match starts the hole. So let's say, for example, that Bill and I are playing a match against Arnold and Dan. And at the first tee, let's say our tee time's 8 o'clock. I am not there. Bill and one player from the match, and when let's say they go ahead and tee off, or one player tees off. So at that point, I'm not allowed to join them. Then they play the first hole, and I'm still not there. They get to the second tee, and one player tees off on the second hole. Doesn't matter. Could be Bill, could be Arnold, could be Dan. Then if I'm not there when any one of those 3 is teed off on the second hole, then I can't join them for the second hole. And hopefully I get there in time to join them for the third hole. In stroke play, it's going to be different. That if the absent partner arrives before his partner starts a hole, then he may join. So what does that mean? Let's say similar situation, we get to the second tee, and let's say on the second hole, Dan and Arnold have the honor, and let's say one of them tees off on the second hole, then I show up. Am I allowed to play the second hole in 4-ball stroke play? The answer is yes. So the reason for the difference is that in match play, when play for a hole starts, your opponents have the right to know who they're playing against for that hole. And it's not right for them to tee off thinking, okay, we're just playing against Bill on this hole, because that could affect their strategy, only to have me show up. So that's why there is the difference between the two. But an arriving partner who's not allowed to play may still give advice or help to the other partner, or take actions for the other partner during that hole. So I could walk along with Bill and say, Bill, when I played here in the practice round yesterday, this was, more uphill than I thought. You should probably hit one more club. That's okay. Rule 23.5, players' actions affecting the partner's play. Again, nice, simple, general statement. Player allowed to take any actions concerning the partner's ball that the partner may take. So anything that the player himself may do, his partner may also do, in effect. A player may take any action concerning the partner's ball that the partner is allowed to take, such as marking the ball and lifting it, replacing it, and even dropping it, which is a change for this year. A player and the player's caddy may help the partner in any way that the partner's caddy is allowed to help, just as we saw in foursome play. And then, an interesting, an addition for emphasis and clarity at the top of page 193, the last sentence of Rule 23.5. In stroke play, partners must not agree with each other to leave a ball in place on the putting green to help either of them or any other player. So just a reminder that partners themselves may not agree to do that, and that this provision applies in stroke play. So in match play, is that okay for partners to do? They can, but the opponents could say, no, hold on, we think that ball might help Bill. We want it lifted. 23.5b, partners responsible for the player's actions. Any action taken by the player concerning the partner's ball is treated as having been taken by the partner. If the action would breach a rule if taken by the partner, then the partner is in breach of the rule and gets the resulting penalty. So let's say, for example, Bill and I are walking down the fairway. Both our balls are in the fairway in plain sight, and we're talking, and I'm not paying attention, and I kick and move Bill's ball. So if Bill himself moved his ball, what would be the ruling under Rule 9? It'd be he would get a one-stroke penalty and would have to replace the ball. Now, if his partner does that, what's the ruling? Same thing, that he, the owner of the ball, would get a one-stroke penalty and would have to replace the ball.
And conversation becomes minimal.
Yeah, and then we don't worry about that for the rest of the round because we don't have any more friendly conversation. All right, now order of play. Partners 23.6. Partners may play in the order the side considers best. This means that when it's a player's turn to play, either the player or his partner may play next. Exception, again, taking something that was in the decisions and bringing it into the rule, is continuing play after a concession in match play. A player must not continue play of a hole after the player's next stroke has been conceded if this would help his or her partner. And this is how or when in 4-ball match play, you can help yourself if you're really on your toes and watching what's going on. That, for example, if I'm putting for a double bogey and Bill's putting for a par and I'm putting on the same line as Bill, it'd be a good strategic move to concede my putt so that I can't help Bill with his line. But if I go ahead and putt after that concession, then my score, say my double bogey, stands for the hole, but the partner's score, meaning Bill's, cannot count for the hole, meaning probably might be our last match together. 23.7, partners may share clubs as long as between the two of them they have no more than 14. All right, Rule 23.8, which has a number of sections, talks about when there's a penalty incurred, when does that penalty apply to just one player, when it applies to both partners, and when there's a disqualification. So first, we're going to look at penalties other than disqualification. And the penalty normally applies only to the player and not to his partner. When a player gets a penalty other than disqualification, that penalty normally applies only to the player and not to the partner, except in the situations covered in the next section. So any penalty strokes are added only to the player's score. And in match play, a player who incurs the general penalty simply has no score for that hole, but his partner is still in that hole. So the case where, let's say we're walking down the fairway and I kick and move my own ball, only I will get a penalty stroke for that, and Bill, my partner, would incur no penalty. So here are 3 situations, though, where the penalty would also apply to the partner. First, breach of Rule 4.1b. So we take the case where Bill and I are partners, and Bill starts off birdie. I start off bogey. Then on the 3rd tee, I turn to Bill and say, Bill, I'm sorry, I started around with 15 clubs. So in match play, in both forms of play, in match play, the side gets the penalty. So meaning if thanks to Bill's birdie, we were 2 up. Now what's the status of the match before we tee off number 3? Tied. And then if this happens in stroke play, we were 2 under par after 2 holes. Then what are we going to do? We're going to add 2 penalty strokes to Bill's score for each of the first 2 holes. So now instead of starting birdie, we start bogey. So now that's a 4-stroke penalty for us, which will strain relations. If the player's breach helps his partner's play, in either match play or stroke play, the partner gets the same penalty. So let's say, for example, that I hit my ball under a bush, Bill hits his ball nearby, also under the bush. I go in and Bill has his back turned. Bill has no idea what I'm doing. And I start breaking off branches to improve the area of my intended swing. And then it so happens that the same branches I broke off improve the area of his intended swing. We know I'm going to be penalized under Rule 8 for improving the conditions affecting the stroke. And because that helped Bill's play, he's also going to be penalized in that case. And the 3rd situation is in match play only. When the player's breach hurts the opponent's play, then the partner also gets the same penalty as the player. So if I, let's say, deliberately, worsen an opponent's lie or deliberately deflect a ball in motion, for bad reasons, and that hurts the opponent's play, then Bill would also incur the same penalty, which in most cases would mean we both incur a loss of hole penalty, which means we lose the hole. An exception, and this exception is an absolute. A player who makes a stroke at a wrong ball is not treated as having helped his partner's play or hurt his opponent's play. So if we get up to our balls in the fairway, I mistakenly think Bill's ball is mine and I hit it, then Bill realizes what happened. And I say, gosh, Bill, I've played a wrong ball. I incur a penalty for that. But hey, just so you know, there's a lot more wind up there than it looks. You might want to hit 1 more club. He says, oh, gosh, thanks. This exception says that has not helped his play, no matter what. So he is not going to be penalized. Only I will be penalized in that case.
Can you be disqualified for serious misconduct if the reason you did that was that you were playing so lousy and your score isn't going to count? Maybe you're lying 6 by the time you got to Bill's ball, and you said, "Well, I'll play Bill's ball."
Okay, all right. Let's say that I'm a bad golfer and I'm a bad human being, and by the time we're in a situation, we get to a situation where I lie 6, Bill near Bill's ball, Bill lies 2, and I, the expression "little knowledge is a dangerous thing," and I know about this exception, so I say, "Oh, I'm out of the hole. I'm just going to go ahead and play Bill's ball because that might help him." Could you apply serious misconduct to that? I think that is an option. I think another possibility could be is that if I knowingly play Bill's ball, I think you could make a case that I've made a practice stroke during play of the hole. And therefore you say I've done that, then, and if that helps Bill, then Bill's also penalized. So I think you could look at it one of those 2 ways. And obviously there are different penalties involved in terms of disqualification for serious misconduct versus a 2-stroke penalty. But I think you could look at it either of those two ways. And there is, precedent, I think, in the interpretation that says if a player deliberately under Rule 1, if a player deliberately breaches a rule, that could be serious misconduct. All right, let's see, Rule 23.8B, which deals just with disqualification penalties. First is a list when a breach by one partner means the side is disqualified. That is, if either partner gets a penalty of disqualification under any of these rules. And note that with it, several of these rules have graduated penalty statements where, say, the first breach is the general penalty and the subsequent breach is results in disqualification, such as use of equipment. And if a player uses a swing aid during the on the approach to the first hole, and then uses a wind gauge on the second tee, then the penalty would be disqualification for him, but also for his side in that case. So it's important to keep in mind that if one partner breaches one of these two rules, that doesn't automatically mean the other partner incurs the same penalty, just when that breach reaches the stage of disqualification. So we have some examples for both forms of play, then one for match play only, and then some for stroke play only. Next section, when a breach by both partners means the side disqualified. If both partners get a penalty of disqualification under the following rules, such as starting. Well, if neither partner's there at the first tee, then they're going to have a problem if they reach the disqualification stage there. So if neither partner's there at the 5-minute mark, then the side will be disqualified. Stroke play only, sides disqualified if at the same hole both players get the disqualification penalty under these rules. So for example, if on the third hole neither Bill nor I hole out, we have a problem. In stroke play, we would be disqualified. Then last item, when a breach by one partner means that the player has no valid score for the hole. So where a player breaches a rule with a penalty of disqualification, the other situations, the player is not disqualified, but his or her score of the hole where the breach happened cannot count for the side. In match play, if both partners breach such a rule at the same hole, the side loses the hole. All right, so that's 4-ball play somewhat quickly. And in a lot of ways, there are a few key principles in this rule, but also some important lists. And it's never a bad idea when you have, especially a disqualification penalty involved, don't try to make that ruling without referring to these lists here to see whether the side would be disqualified. So any questions on that? All right, if not, Dan will finish things up with 21 and 24 for us.
Thanks, Jim.
Rule 21. We'll go over this fairly quickly. The purpose section is particularly good in this rule. Rule 21 covers 4 other forms of individual play, including 3 forms of stroke play where scoring is different than in regular stroke play: Stableford, maximum score, and par bogey. The key to remember of all of those is those are stroke play events. Every rule 1 through 20 applies in all of those forms of play because they're stroke play. And there's a couple of exceptions, and that's what we're going to go over. Stableford. And the exceptions are going to be in the scoring area and in the penalty/disqualification area. And those are going to be the only changes. So Stableford, most of us in this room are in the senior category, some in the super senior, and then a few in the super senior divisions. And you've played in the WSGA events, the senior tour, and you know what a Stableford scoring is. Stableford scoring is by points, and the committee sets a fixed target score. WSGA always sets the fixed target score as par. So if you look at the chart on the right-hand side of 177, where it says fixed target score, that's going to be par. So when a player gets the fixed target score of a par, he's going to get 2 points. Well, if there's 18 holes, you should know that if you par every hole, you will have 36 points. You should know if you par every hole in stroke play, you will have a 72, assuming that it's a 72 par hole. So right there, you notice that in stroke play, it's going to be 72, and in stable forward, it's going to be 36. So what if you get 17 pars in a row, and then you get a double bogey on the last hole? Well, you're 2 over par. And it's 34 in stable fourth because you don't get anything for the last hole. And in regular scoring, it's a 74. In both cases, you're 2 over par. The beauty of stable forward is that's as bad as it gets, is a double bogey. Once you start to get to a triple bogey, that's when the benefit of stable forward kicks in. So if you have 17 pars in a row and you triple bogey the last hole, you will be 2 over par in stable forward, and you will then have a 34, but you will be 3 over par for 75 in regular score. Why? Because in regular score, you got to count them all, and in stable forward, you're effectively capped once you've reached a double bogey. The beauty of stable fourth is not only is it capped, but it helps the pace of play. You don't need to finish a hole. Once you get to the double bogey, you're done. You can continue, but you don't have to. Scores for score entered for each hole. We do, since this is stroke play, we do have to comply with the requirements of 3.3 on the scorecard. And you must turn in your scorecard, and it must be signed just as it is in stroke play, because this is in fact stroke play. So if hole is completed by holing out, when score would result in points being awarded, the scorecard must show the score. So if you're hoping to get something other than 0, you have to have a scorecard that has a score in the box that actually reflects the score that you got. If you don't want any, or if you haven't earned any points, you can either leave it blank, or you can put any score resulting in 0 points. So if you are on a par 4 first hole and you are putting for a bogey, and that ball goes past the hole and it isn't going anywhere, you do not have to putt for a 6. You can pick up your ball and you can put 6 on the scorecard. You can put 7 on the scorecard, or you can leave it blank, because in either case, you're going to get 0 points. Bill, do you have a preferred recommendation for people in these events that they should put the actual score? Do you prefer they put an X? Do you prefer they have 0?
We request that if they do not finish the hole, they put an X through the box of that hole on the player's line, because that clearly tells us that the player did not hole out.
And then the computer will automatically give you 0 points. And remember, if it's higher than a double bogey, you don't have to finish. But if there's a net event and you're getting a stroke, it's effectively a net triple bogey is as high. You can get a net triple bogey if it's net. All right, penalties. This is 21.1C.
Not a net triple. You can get a
You can get a triple
natural
bogey.
triple,
Right.
because it's a net bogey.
Net double.
Net bogey. Yeah, net double.
Right.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
always tell the kids to enter a double bogey plus any dots that are on the card. So it could be a triple, it could be a quad. But start with double and then add however many dots for the strokes that make it a net double bogey.
All right, penalties in stable forward, 21.1C. Let's look at the second, page 179 first, and talk about parent 2, disqualification penalties. When you think about the fact that you are not required to get any points on a hole, these are the 4 rules that you are going to be disqualified under if you don't correct your mistake in regular stroke play. failure to hole out, failure from teeing outside the teeing area, failed to correct it, failure to correct a mistake from a wrong ball, and failure to correct mistake of playing from a wrong place, a serious breach. Because you're getting 0 points, you can't do any worse than 0 points. So what this is saying is you're not going to be disqualified if you don't correct the 4 must corrects that you have to correct in stroke play. And then let's go back to 21.1C parent 1. And this is sort of my view, one of the oddities of Stableford, and that is we still want you to be penalized, and we're going to give you these 3 penalties no matter what you do. And what this says is if you're on the first hole, for instance, and it says time of starting, and you show up 5 minutes late, 4 minutes late, and you play that hole out, and it's a par 4, and you get a 6 on the hole, and you pick up. How many points have you gotten? 0. You can't do any worse than 0. Well, this is telling you you actually can do worse than 0. And in these 3 situations, the 14 club rule, time of starting, and unreasonable delay, you will actually have the penalty, and you can't escape it. And the way the penalty is imposed, it's imposed after the fact by the committee by deducting points. So even though on the first hole you have maxed out at a 6 and you got 0 points, you're not going to escape the 2-stroke penalty you should have gotten for not starting on time. And the way they do that is they, instead of getting a 36 is what you, or 34 is what you should have gotten, they'll subtract 2 and you're going to get a 32. The tricky part about this, if you look at the top of 179, is you must report the facts of these breaches to the committee, and if you don't, you're disqualified. So while Stableford is very forgiving for the player, if you breach these 3 things and you don't tell the committee, you're disqualified. The reason for this is because there's no way the committee knows about these 3 unless you tell them. So that's why you have to tell them. If you don't, you're disqualified. All right, so that is Stableford, you know, the 21.1D. It's the same Jordan Spieth rule that John just went over. Let's talk about maximum score. Maximum score is new for 2019. It is identical to stroke play and virtually identical to Stableford, except for the scoring mechanism. What the committee will do is that they will cap or set a maximum on what you can get on any hole. An example, they may very well say the most you can take is a double bogey. If they do that, then if you par 17 holes in a row and you get a double bogey on the last hole, you're going to get a 74. Why? Because you had your pars, the last hole you got a double bogey, you're 2 over par. If you get a triple bogey on the last hole, you're still going to get a 74. Why? Because that last hole, when you get your triple bogey, it's going to be reduced to a double bogey. So it has the benefit of Stableford scoring without the somewhat uncomfortable thing of saying, well, I'm getting points and so forth. Here you're actually getting strokes. It's just capped at a particular number. The other thing that is interesting about maximum score is it does not contain the penalty provisions in Stableford, which are under 21.1C1, in which they are mandating that you're going to get those 3 penalties no matter what you do. Maximum score. You tee off on the first hole, you're 4 minutes late. You wind up getting a double bogey on the first hole. You wind up getting a triple bogey on the first hole. It's reduced to a double bogey, because that's the most you can get, and you escape the penalty for not starting on time. So maximum score is even more forgiving. And then the penalty provision, you have the same 4. We're not going to disqualify you if you fail to correct those same 4 items. Starting outside, failing to hole out, starting outside the teeing area, playing from wrong place, serious breach, and wrong ball. And then you have the Jordan Spieth exception, and that is it. Look at par bogey. Par bogey is another form of stroke play. So every rule 1 through 20 is going to count. The difference is the scoring, and the oddity of it is the scoring is match play scoring. But understand it's stroke play that the rules apply, but you score by match play. So what the committee might do is to set a target score at a par. It may set a target score at a bogey. And let's assume that it sets a target score at a bogey. Then when you get a par on that first hole, you have won the hole. If you get a double bogey on the hole, and par or bogey is the target score, you're going to lose the hole. Well, what if you get a 12 on the first hole? Well, you've just lost the hole because all you're doing is scoring as if it's match play. And at the end of the 18 holes, the person who has won the most holes is the winner of the tournament. It helps the pace of play. In terms of what you need to do for a scorecard is, remember this is stroke play, so you have to have a scorecard and you have to put down the score that you got. When score results in the hole being won or tied, the scorecard must show the actual score that you got. When the score results in the hole being lost, the scorecard can show either no score or any score that results in the hole being lost. So if the par bogey for that hole is 5 and you put down a 6 or a 12, that's okay, you've lost the hole. If you put down a 5, you're going to tie the hole, and then if you put down something less, you're going to win the hole. So in par bogey, you don't get any real benefit for really winning the hole by a lot. So all you got to do is just win the hole. Or similarly, on the other side, if you lose it by a lot, there's no difference than if you lose it by a little. The exception on 183, it says no penalty if no effect on result of the hole. That's an oddity in par bogey. It doesn't come up very often, but this would be an example. The fixed target score is 5. You write down on your scorecard that you got a 3. And actually you got a 4. Is that score incorrect? Yes. But it does not affect who won, lost the hole, because either a 3 or 4 beats a 5. Then you notice the reintroduction of 21.3C and the penalties other than disqualification. So remember, these 3 were in the stable for to make sure that you got a penalty for these 3. If you're playing maximum score, these 3 are not in there. And now when you're back in par bogey, those 3 penalties are back in. So again, if you start the first hole 3 minutes late and you score a 4 on the hole and it's 5 is the target score, you then are going to get a 6 on that hole and you're going to lose. You can't escape that. Similarly, if you get a 6 on that first hole, you lose the hole and you're going to lose another hole because 21.3C1 has these 3 exceptions. Next page, parent 2, disqualification penalties. These are the same 4. Again, if you don't finish a hole, you're not going to be disqualified. Normal stroke play, you would. Par bogey, you're not. 3D is the Jordan Spieth exception. All right, 21.4, 3-ball match play. 3-ball match play, as the name implies, is a form of match play. The thing that you need to remember about this is that each player has 2 distinct matches. When you bear that in mind, the rest of it makes sense. So A is playing against B. He's playing a separate match against C. B is playing a separate match against A, and B is playing a separate match against C. So all of the rules in match play apply, and there are just only a couple wrinkles that are worth talking about. If player A in his match with B, if B requires him to play his shot because he teed from outside the teeing area, he then has to recall the shot. He has to replay the shot. Player C says, I don't care. So then player A will actually be playing 2 balls. He will play one against B and a separate one against C. Lastly, at the bottom of the page, other forms of play. This is an acknowledgement by the drafters of the rules that they're no longer going to be too hoity-toity about giving rules advice and instruction if you are not playing strictly in the form that the USGA and the RNA have approved. This is a wonderful step because they specifically acknowledge that there are other forms of individual play, and we embrace them, such as green sums. Everybody know what a green sum is? It's alternate shot, except both players get to play from the first tee. A lot of clubs play that in husband and wife or parent-child and so forth. That's called green sums. Under the old rules, it wasn't recognized, and if you did that, if there was a rules question, in theory, the USGA wouldn't give you an answer because you were not playing, quote, according to the rules of golf. Now, they recognize these scrambles as another form of play that was not recognized. It now is recognized.
3-ball match play. Concessions.
Yes, 3-ball match play, concessions. A is playing against B and C. So in his match, A is playing against B. B says, your putt is good. That is good for a 4. He can't pick it up because C may not concede it. If C doesn't concede it, then he putts. So interesting enough, A could have a 4 in his match against B and wind up with a 5 in his match against C, because you can only concede in the match that you're playing against that particular player that gave you the concession. John, we have 3 minutes left. What do you think? We got through them all?
I think, well, we have rule 24.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry, John. That's why we have 3 minutes left. I can do it in 3 minutes. Team competitions. This is a new rule for 2019. Team competitions, the classic is that as a high school or a college event, you're playing as teams. In terms of the competition, we'll say this is the format. 5 players play, 4 players score. It could be a situation in which there's just individual play. It could be a situation where there's just team scores, or it can be where you have both team play and individual play, which is typical at the high school and college level. You name a team captain, which is generally speaking going to be the coach, not always, but that's basically what it's going to be. So 24.4 allows the team to have an advice giver. An advice giver, again, normally is going to be the coach. And you'll see the very first line there. It says the committee may adopt a local rule allowing each team to name 1 person. So they're saying you can have a local rule that allows 1 person. Skip down about 5 lines to the blue stuff. The committee may adopt a local rule allowing each team to name 2 advice givers. And I'm sure there's an explanation, but I don't understand what it is. Why they didn't just write the first one to say the committee may adopt a local rule allowing each team to name 1 or 2. And I think the reason is because under the old rules, it was 8.1. It said you could only have 1 advice giver. They didn't call it advice giver, but that's what it was. And there was nothing in the rules or the decisions that allowed you to have 2. However, every high school and every college had 2, because they would point to that little booklet with Paula Creamer on the front called, what was it called? How to Conduct a Competition, that says in there, with no authority whatsoever, if a team wants to have 2 advice givers, that's okay. So now we have explicitly the right to do it. And the thing to bear in mind with advice givers / coaches, and where this is going to come up, and we got to do something about it, it's going to be the 10.2B4 caddy standing behind, because this rule specifically means that the caddy and the coach are going to be treated, the advice giver and the the advice giver is, or coach is going to be treated like the caddy. And so you cannot stand behind. And I guarantee you, when we get to the state high school boys tournament, half of the coaches are going to be standing behind their player, not for purposes of giving advice, but just because they're standing there. And you know, the rule says if they stand there for any reason. And now we have the clarification that John was part of that says, well, we didn't mean that. You got to have a really good reason, and it better be giving advice. And even if you do it, if you back away, there isn't a penalty. Is that kind of accurate, John?
Yeah. Sounds like a good time for me to get to there for it.
Thanks.
But before I leave, I just want to thank everyone for everything you do for the WSGA and just for golfers in Wisconsin. That this is going to be a big year for everyone, and good luck with everyone. And especially a big thanks to Dan for teaching so much of this, and to Bill and Jeff for all they do on a daily basis. And thank you all.
Thanks.
See you, John. Flying out. Good boy, John. Oh, yeah, I think we're done unless anybody has any questions. There's no more than 24 rules there as I can tell.
Bill, when will the WSG hard card be available?
Can be printed off as soon as we walk through a computer.
Because I think not everybody